book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is the second, Race and Guns in a Fatally Unequal America by Carol Anderson. This is from the introduction. It was like a snuff film, that July 6, 2016 live stream. Philando Castile sat in his car, buckled in, bleeding, dying. "Why did you shoot him, sir?" asked his fiancée, Diamond Reynolds, pain piercing her every word. Castile, who had been pulled over in a suburb of St. Paul, Minnesota, because his, quote, wide-set nose, end quote, supposedly resembled that of a robbery suspect, had been reaching for his ID, but in order to avoid any surprises, let the police officer know he had a gun with him, a legally permitted, right-to-carry concealed gun. That was all the cop needed to know. Officer Geronimo Yanez began shooting. Castile's death came just one day after Alton Sterling's down in Louisiana. He, too, was carrying a gun, which was not unusual in this right-to-carry state. Granted, Sterling had a felony conviction, so owning a firearm was, for him, illegal, but he had been robbed before and wanted protection. On July 5, 2016, the Baton Rouge police received a 911 call that there was a man with a weapon threatening customers at a local convenience store. As officers rolled onto the scene, they saw Sterling sitting there, selling CDs and DVDs, just as the store owner allowed him to do and indeed welcomed. The threatening man was not Sterling. In fact, there was no threatening man. It had been a prank call, but that didn't matter. Within a few minutes, police had thrown the black man down, pinned him to the asphalt, and then started yelling that Sterling had a gun. He did. It was in his pocket where he could hardly reach it, what with the officers squatting on both his legs and one arm. Nevertheless, the police began firing round after round into his prone body, point blank. Blood poured out of his chest, but not for long. Alton Sterling was dead. The back-to-back deaths of these two black men police had shot for carrying guns should have jolted into action the Second Amendment's staunchest advocate, the National Rifle Association. In 1995, for example, the organization's denunciations flew fast and furious when it contended that law enforcement not only overreacted, but went out of its way to kill gun owners. Angered by the deaths at the Branch Davidian compound in Waco, Texas, and the siege and firefight at Ruby Ridge, Idaho, both of which were sparked by federal agents serving warrants for weapons violations, Wayne LaPierre, the NRA's executive vice president, angrily wrote, quote, "If you have a badge, you have the government's go-ahead to harass, intimidate, and even murder law-abiding citizens," end quote. He further denounced cops as, quote, "jackbooted government thugs who have more power to take away our constitutional rights, break in our doors, seize our guns, destroy our property, and even injure or kill us." Nearly 2 decades later, that sentiment had not changed. This was evident when Nevada rancher Cliven Bundy, who had refused to pay over $1 million in fees for grazing his cattle on public land, summoned his gun-toting, self-styled militiamen to battle with federal authorities to prevent the seizure of his herd for restitution. Richard Mack, a former recipient of the NRA's Law Enforcement Officer of the Year award, asserted, "If federal agents are going to start killing people, I'm sorry, but to show the world how ruthless these people are, women and children need to be placed in the front lines as human shields." Mack didn't flinch as he insisted, quote, "Women need to be the first ones shot. I would have put my own wife or daughter there on the front lines, and I would have been a screaming bloody murder to watch them die," end quote. Larry Pratt, a speaker at the NRA's 2014 National Convention, commenting on the fact that Bundy, quote, backed them, the Bureau of Land Management agents, down with automatic rifles and other deadly weaponry, proudly called that armed confrontation, quote, "a proper, legitimate, lawful response to illegitimate, unlawful exercise of government power, particularly on the federal level," end quote. Yet how quickly the NRA's swagger disappeared when government agents gunned down Philando Castile and Alton Sterling for merely carrying guns. Sterling's death didn't even merit acknowledgement. As for Castile, the NRA broke its silence only after inordinate pressure from African-American members led the gun manufacturers' lobby to issue a tepid statement that the Second Amendment was applicable, quote, regardless of race, religion, or sexual orientation. When pressed further by many of its members to stand up for Castile, the often fierce organization demurred, saying it was, quote, important for the NRA not to comment while the investigation is ongoing. This situational silence did not go unnoticed. The NRA had not only loudly defended the rights of those of the Branch Davidian cult and at Ruby Ridge, men who had actually shot and killed members of law enforcement, but the organization had also doubled down on calling for more guns in the face of mass shootings in a public school in Newtown, Connecticut, and a movie theater in Aurora, Colorado. Yet here, the guardian of the Second Amendment was now deliberately ignoring the inconvenient fact that black men had been killed for merely possessing a firearm. Where's the NRA? Asked journalist Anna Kozlowska. Even Sterling?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, it's a whole brand new week here, and President Biden just gave well, he was supposed to give a speech. It turned into kind of a mini press conference in which he said that because Mitch McConnell has chosen to filibuster raising the debt ceiling, there is a very real possibility that the United States could default on its debts for the first time in its history. Now, I'm skeptical that this is going to happen. I think the president is playing high-stakes chicken with Mitch McConnell, but he is saying Mitch McConnell is playing high-stakes chicken with the economy. That's true. Here's the deal. What McConnell has said is that he's not going to allow the debt ceiling increase to pass with just the 50 Democratic votes. The Democrats are ready to pass it. You'll keep in mind, Republicans passed debt ceiling increases 3 times and suspended it the 4th time during the 4 years of Trump's administration. They raised the debt ceiling 8 times during George W. Bush's administration. They raised the debt ceiling 12 times during the time of Reagan and the first Bush. They just, raising the debt ceiling when there's a Republican in the White House is like just pro forma for the Republicans. But as soon as a Democrat comes in, this goes back to Jude Winiski's whole two Santa Claus thing. As soon as a Democrat comes in, it's like, oh my God, we can't pay the credit card. But McConnell has invoked a filibuster. So he said, no, you can't pass this with the simple majority that the Constitution lays out for the Senate. Instead, you're going to have 60 votes. You're going to have to get 10 Republicans to go along, and none of us are going to do it. So that's interesting. We'll see where this goes. I just wanted you to know. I think, frankly, if the Republicans continue to try to, in this bluff, to try to destroy the full faith and credit of the United States, the Dow, by the way, is down about 400 points right now, I think in part on this news. If the Republicans continue to play this game, there's still a couple of wild cards, as we discussed last week, that the Democrats could play. Number one, minting $1 trillion platinum coin. Yeah, Paul Krugman recommended that. Or number two, and I think this is the more viable one, is you just simply ignore them. Ignore that debt ceiling law and just say that law is unconstitutional because it violates the 14th Amendment. It calls into question the debt of the United States. 14th Amendment says the debt of the United States shall not be called into question. And, just keep on rolling. And frankly, I'm guessing that may be how it's going to play out, although McConnell is saying, oh, yeah, just put your debt ceiling thing into your $3.5 trillion reconciliation bill, which is going to just this is nuts. Okay, number one. Number two, the Women's March was this past weekend. Louise and I watched it on TV. We saw, actually, to watch it, we had to go to BBC, which raises the question, why was it not? I mean, I realize there was some smattered coverage, but, BBC led all weekend. BBC led their U.S. their U.S. news reports, the ones for the U.S., with the Women's March and interviewing women and talking about abortion and all this kind of stuff. The national network's kind of crickets. Anyhow, did you go? Anything you want to share? Do you have a story to tell about it? You're welcome to call us, 202-808-9925. My op-ed today and my opening rant, as it were, as they are usually the same thing, is titled Hungarian-Style Soft Fascism is the GOP's Ruthless New Brand. And here's the point I'm making. It's very fashionable, and in fact, I've even done this myself, to compare the modern-day Republican Party and their repudiation of a whole bunch of standards. It just occurred to me, I haven't, before I get into this rant, it just occurred to me I have not yet told you everything else that's going to be on the program. I also want to get to, is the commitment to democracy, is there enough of a commitment to democracy in the United States that the Republican Party won't get away with the plan I'm just about to tell you? In our second hour, Mae Davis is going to drop by. She's going to be talking, we're going to be asking the question. She's with the Independent Women's Forum saying, oh, these voter suppression laws, they're no big deal. Come on, minorities are smart enough to figure out how to get an ID and vote. So I'm just going to ask her, what does the GOP have against biometrics and mail-in voting? And Geeky Science, how important is fish to our diet? And as Americans realize, and in our third hour, as Americans realize the Supreme Court has always been partisan, will this lead to reform, like court packing, for example? So back to my main rant here, again, to kind of reset it. The title, Hungarian-Style Fascism is the GOP's ruthless new brand. And, many of us have compared the Republican Party to Hitler and Mussolini and Franco and Pinochet. Those guys had what you could call hard fascism. They were out in the streets, they were lining people up, they were shooting them, they were digging mass graves, they were dumping them out of helicopters, they were building death camps. That's not today's Republican Party. They might get there someday, but today's Republican Party instead of modeling after Hitler, Mussolini, Franco, those guys, they're modeling themselves after somebody entirely different. Today's Republican Party has decided in just the last year or so, now keep in mind, it was 3 years ago that 7 Republican members of Congress went to Russia to spend the 4th of July with President Putin. That was Richard Shelby of Alabama, Steve Daines of Montana, John Thune of South Dakota, John Kennedy of Louisiana, Jerry Moran of Kansas, John Hooven of North Dakota, and Kay Granger of Texas. So, 7 Republicans go to Russia, one a member of the House, to hang out, in the Kremlin for to celebrate the 4th of July. That was so old school. That was 3 years ago. Now, they're no longer looking to Putin and Russia as their role model. They are looking to Hungary and Viktor Orbán. And seriously looking to Hungary as the new model for American democracy. Viktor Orbán has done in Hungary what Republicans want to do in the United States. He has succeeded in establishing basically soft fascism in Hungary. And he's been so successful at it that Tucker Carlson went over, did his show from Hungary for a week on Fox So-Called News, and all but offered Orbán a full body massage during the commercial breaks. Just, giving him a tongue bath. The Conservative Political Action Committee, those of you who have been longtime listeners to this program, we've been on the air, since 2003. It's 18 years. The first decade or so of this program, well, I'd say probably from about 2005 or 2006, right up until about 5 years ago or so. Every year, I would go to the CPAC convention. They had a radio row there, and I would debate conservatives. I'd sit in the row, and Republican politicians would come along, and they'd sit down with Sean Hannity, and they'd sit down with Rusty Humphreys, and then they sit down with me. And sometimes they were very surprised by that. In fact, in 2008, at their convention, I had the head of the RNC, and in the middle of my question, I started asking him if women who got abortions should be executed by firing squad or being hanged. And he suddenly goes, "Wait a minute, you're a liberal!" And he pulls his headphones off and jumps up and stalks off. So anyhow, the CPAC has always been a Republican thing, right? Ronald Reagan keynoted their first convention in 1974. Every Republican president since has keynoted CPAC. CPAC just announced that they're holding next year's meeting in Budapest, Hungary. Why? Why is it that all of a sudden everybody's going to Budapest? Well, because Viktor Orbán has pioneered this new kind of soft fascism. Steve Bannon called Orbán Trump before Trump. Michael Casey over at NBC News Think site said, quote, "From targeting migrants to inflaming an ethno-nationalist base, from attacking the press to whipping up nativist conspiracies, from ushering in unprecedented corruption to tearing down democratic protections, Trumpism is increasingly indistinguishable from Orbánism." I mentioned Tucker Carlson and Ronald Reagan. Well, here's how Orbán got where he is. He ran on a slogan, "Making Hungary Great Again," strengthening Christianity and building a wall against Hungary's southern border to stop non-white Muslim Syrian refugees from coming into Hungary. He's also now trying to keep out people from Slovakia. Once he took power, his party altered the Constitution to do what you and I might call gerrymandering, so that basically his party will never be out of power again. He's also packed Hungary's courts, including their Supreme Court, so any challenges to him or his party just die in the courts. Women in Hungary have been marginalized. Viktor Orbán said that Hungarian politics is continual character assassination that women cannot endure. And so the governing coalition, which has 133 members of parliament, only has 11 women in it. Sort of looking like the Republican Party, right? Increasingly, he's turned Hungary into a refugee or a refuge for corrupt oligarchs and neo-fascists from other countries. He just granted, for example, asylum to convicted felon and former Prime Minister of Macedonia, Nikolai Gruevski. NBC News says, in many ways, Trump and Orbán are birds of an autocratic feather. Is Trump preparing for a visa? Orbán has taken part of the Hungarian security apparatus and turned it into his own private personal police force, much like Trump did with members of ICE and the Border Patrol that he used, for example, to attack Lafayette Square, and that he sent here to Portland to attack citizens in Portland. The nation's business scene in Hungary has been completely taken over by Orbán's buddies. He's created a whole new generation of oligarchs. All the major news outlets, all the television networks, all the radio networks, all the major newspapers in Hungary are now owned by Orbán cronies. There is still a small independent press in Hungary, but they're largely ignored by everybody because they have no voice. They can't, there's no way to get their stuff out. Orbán's declared a war on science. He shut down the Hungarian Science Academy. He says climate change is left-wing trickery made up by Barack Obama. Last month, Hungary passed a law requiring sex education in schools to say that being gay was bad. And they also banned any positive portrayal of LGBTQ people on television in Hungary. They've conflated homosexuality with pedophilia. The latest anti-gay law passed the Hungarian parliament just a few months ago by a vote of 157 to 1. So, a lot of Americans thought, wait a minute, the Republican Party is like going the way of the fascists, or they're going to hang out with Putin too much. No, that's not what's going on. Bannon's new call just last week for shock troops to immediately take over the government right after the 2024 elections is almost identical to what Viktor Orbán did when he returned to power in 2010 in Hungary. He gave his party control over the voting process nationally. Are they going to get away with it, the Republicans here?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Will enough Americans realize what's actually going on in Hungary? I mean, you Google Hungary and what you find is all this wonderful stuff on right-wing sites about how great it is. And welcome back. Joyce just grabbed that before I could. There we go. Thank you, Joyce. Tony in Long Beach, California. Hey, Tony, what's on your mind today?
Are you there live?
I am, and you are on the air.
I'd like to...
Okay, hang on just a second. I'm sorry, Tony. You're back. Say it again.
I'd like to talk to you about Ayn Rand.
Okay, go for it.
1978, I met her.
Really?
Now, virtually all you talk about her, I am in complete agreement about. Mm-hmm. In fact, for years, I lectured on her, not to agree with her, but to disagree in the sense that if someone as brilliant as she, and she was brilliant.
Oh, there's no doubt about that.
Right. If someone
so was
is
Ted Bundy, by the way.
Say it again?
So was Ted Bundy, by the way.
Oh, no. But I'm not complimenting her.
Right. I get it.
What I'm saying is, when I lectured, I would say if someone as brilliant as she could be so wrong, how about the rest of us? But what I want to bring to your attention is that in 1978, she was adamantly anti-Ronald Reagan, completely opposed to him, completely opposed to conservatives. Conservatives hated her. As you remember, Paul Ryan came out recommending her books to all those who worked for her until he found out that she was an atheist. He didn't even know that. But just one more thing, if I may.
Well, if I can just interject, Tony, and
Sure.
you know, we still have a minute and 10 seconds. The reason that she hated Republicans back in the 70s was because Republicans still were, if they didn't believe it, they were at least using the words that they thought that governance of a country, that government governing a country in ways other than just a military and a court system was a good thing. I mean, you know, Richard Nixon signed the EPA into law, for example, which made Ayn Rand nuts. Reagan passed a lot of good legislation in California, some pretty terrible too, but that was her principal objection, was that the Republicans were not anarchists enough.
No, if I may, Tom, and I know you don't have much time left. Before the Libertarian Party was started, Murray Rothbard, one of the founders of the Libertarian Party, and a friend of hers, went to her, said, "We are going to start a party based on your philosophy." And she said, "No, you're not. I will not be a part of it. The only way this country can be changed is through education, not through politics." And finally, Ludwig von Mises, the economist, and I've heard you talk about him, his most famous book was called Human Action.
Right. I read it yesterday.
Did you really?
Yeah, I actually did, yeah. I'm writing a book about him.
Because the first 6 chapters, you would think were written by Thom Hartmann.
Well, in part, although he goes on some fairly racist screeds. but you know, keep in mind, that was written in the 20s, as I recall. Tony, I got to run. Thank you very much for the call. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Hey, we've got a new video up over at ThomHartmann.com about Pygmalion. You heard about this? This is, now I'm not talking about the George Bernard Shaw play that got made into the movie My Fair Lady and all that kind of stuff. No, this is a PR firm in France. And, you know, when you hear from Americans that, oh, we could never put Donald Trump in jail because only third world countries do that. France is not only not a third world country, they're our oldest ally. And they just convicted their former president for the second time of fraud and corruption around the way he was running his campaigns. Nicolas Sarkozy, they just convicted him a second time. Now he's appealing both of them. He's, you know, walking around with an ankle bracelet. But, you know, I've got all the details on this video over at ThomHartmann.com. You can check it out. But, you know, again, next time somebody says, we can't put Trump in jail, tell them, hey, France did. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So just to add to this question, you know, will Americans figure out that the Republican Party has a new governing model? And no, it's not Hitler. And we can just kind of set that aside. And no, it's not Putin or Russia. It is, you know, they're not probably going to try to, you know, whatever. It is Viktor Orbán. It is Hungary. Are Americans going to figure this out? Or are they going to try to do basically like Orbán did and just take over the country? Over on Alternet, Alex Henderson is writing about Christopher Goldsmith. Goldsmith is the CEO of the intelligence firm Bavarius, and he was on Nicole Walsh's show, in fact, last week. He said, every failed coup is just practice. What's, I think, most disturbing to people now is that it's become out in the public. He said, and then he goes on to talk about some of these various militia groups. He says, for example, the Oath Keepers are an organization that's primarily, and we've had Richard Mack on this program probably a dozen times over the years, one of the founders of the Oath Keepers. He says the Oath Keepers are an organization that's primarily vying for not just military service members, veterans, but also police. And actually, I think Richard Mack is the Constitutional Sheriff's Association, now that I think of it. Oh, he's both? Okay, thank you, Sean. These are people who have a warped sense of patriotism, Christopher Goldsmith writes, who believe that fighting against the government, against their fellow Americans, is somehow patriotic. Now we find this incredible poll. Now there was, some polling last month that found that 66% of Republicans want to secede from the Union. But that's in the South, in the southern states. But this is a new nationwide poll from the Center for Politics at the University of Virginia. And what they found is that more than half of Trump voters surveyed and 41% of Biden voters are in favor of separating red states and blue states. This is incredible. 6 in 10 Trump and Biden voters. I think the key to this whole thing, and I probably should write an op-ed about this, I think the key to this whole thing is this one stat. 6 out of 10 Trump and Biden voters see America as less a representative democracy and more a system that is run by and rigged for the benefits of the wealthy. Americans have figured out the grift. 6 out of 10 have figured out the grift. Meanwhile, conservatives are preparing for civil war, which is pretty amazing stuff. We'll be back with your thoughts, calls, notes, whatever. Women's March right after this.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Did you know about Hungary and Viktor Orbán? And do you think that the average American knows about Hungary and Viktor Orbán and the Republicans' new infatuation with him? Our book today is Why Women Have Better Sex Under Socialism and Other Arguments for Economic Independence by Kristen Godsey. And this is from the introduction titled, You Might Be Suffering from Capitalism. The argument of this book can be summed up succinctly. Unregulated capitalism is bad for women. And if we adopt some ideas from socialism, women will have better lives. If done properly, socialism leads to economic independence, better labor conditions, better work-family balance, and yes, even better sex. Finding a way into a better future requires learning from the mistakes of the past, including a thoughtful assessment of the history of 20th century state socialism in Eastern Europe. That's it. If you like the idea of such outcomes, then come along for an exploration of how we might change things. If you're dubious because you don't understand why capitalism as an economic system is uniquely bad for women, and if you doubt that there could ever be anything good about socialism, this short treatise will provide some illumination. If you don't give a whit about women's lives because you're a gynophobic right-wing internet troll, save your money and go back to your parents' basement right now. This isn't the book for you. Of course, some might argue that unregulated capitalism sucks for almost everyone, but I want to focus on how capitalism disproportionately harms women. Competitive labor markets discriminate against those whose reproductive biology makes them primarily responsible for childbearing. Today, this means humans who get pink hats in the hospital and the letter F next to the name on their birth certificate, as if we've already failed by not coming into the world as a boy. Competitive labor markets also devalue those expected to be the primary caregivers of children. Although societal attitudes have evolved in this regard, our idealization of motherhood means that most of us still believe that baby needs mama, a whole lot more than papa, at least until the child is old enough to play sports. Others will argue that unregulated capitalism is not bad for all women. Yes, for those women lucky enough to sit at the top of the income distribution, the system works pretty well. Although women at the executive level still face gender pay gaps and remain underrepresented in leadership positions, on the whole, things aren't too shabby for the Sheryl Sandbergs of the world.
Of course, sexual harassment still hinders progress, even for those at the top, and too many women believe that if you want to run with the big dogs, you may have to suck it up and ignore the groping and unwanted advances. And race plays an important role as well. White women do a lot better in aggregate than do women of color. But when we look at society as a whole, on average, women are comparatively worse off in countries where markets are less encumbered by regulation, taxation, and public enterprises than they are in nations where state revenues support greater levels of redistribution and larger social safety nets. Choose your data source, and you find the same story. Unemployment and poverty plague women with children. Employers discriminate against women without children because they might have them in the future. In the United States in 2013, women over the age of 65 suffered from poverty at much greater rates than men and dominated those in the category of extreme poverty. Globally, women face higher rates of economic deprivation. Women are often the last to be hired and the first to be fired in cyclical downturns. And when they do find employment, bosses pay them less than men. When states need to slash government spending on education, health care, or old age pensions, mothers, daughters, sisters, and wives must pick up the slack, diverting their energy to care for the young, the sick, and the elderly. Capitalism thrives on women's unpaid labor in the home because women's care work supports lower taxes. Lower taxes mean higher profits for those already at the top of the income ladder, mostly men. But capitalism was not always so savage. Throughout much of the 20th century, state socialism presented an existential challenge to the worst excesses of the free market. The threat posed by Marxist ideologies forced Western governments to expand social safety nets to protect workers from the unpredictable but inevitable booms and busts of the capitalist economy. After the Berlin Wall fell, many celebrated the triumph of the West, consigning socialist ideas to the dustbin of history. But for all its faults, state socialism provided an important foil for capitalism. It was in response to a global discourse of social and economic rights, a discourse that appealed not only to the progressive populations of Africa, Asia, and Latin America, but also to many men and women in Europe and Western Europe and North America, that politicians agreed to improve working conditions for wage laborers, as well as to create social programs for children, the poor, the elderly, the sick, and the disabled, mitigating exploitation and the growth of income inequality. Although there were important antecedents in the 1980s, once state socialism collapsed, capitalism shook off the constraints of market regulation and income redistribution. Without the looming threat of a rival superpower, the last 30 years of global neoliberalism have witnessed a rapid shriveling of social programs that protect citizens from cyclical instability and financial crises, and reduce the vast inequality of economic outcomes between those at the top and those at the bottom of the income distribution. For much of the 20th century, Western capitalist countries also endeavored to outdo the East European countries in terms of women's rights, fueling progressive social change. For example, the state socialists in the USSR and Eastern Europe were so successful at giving women economic opportunities outside the home that initially, for the 2 decades after the end of World War II, women's wage work was conflated with the evils of communism. The American way of life meant male breadwinners and female homemakers. But slowly, socialist championing of women's emancipation began to chip away at the Leave It to Beaver ideal. The Soviet launch of Sputnik in 1957 spurred American leaders to rethink the costs of maintaining traditional gender roles. They feared the state socialists enjoyed an advantage in technological development, and why women have better sex under socialism.
Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. So we've got a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program about the 14th Amendment and the debt ceiling. And just kind of riddle me this one, Batman, right? The 14th Amendment reads, and I'm taking out the parts that specifically refer to pensions and bounties, for services suppressing the insurrection, because it came out of the Civil War. But the 14th Amendment reads, in part, the validity of the public debt of the United States shall not be questioned. In other words, Congress, you can't take actions that might cause the public debt not to be paid. You can't refuse to raise the debt ceiling, is how I read that. The debt ceiling, of course, didn't even exist when they wrote the 14th Amendment. That came along in 1917. But I think this is raising some really important questions, and I dig into it in this video over there. You can check it out. It's all over at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, 35 minutes past the hour. And amazing, amazing. What a day, huh? Ellen in Simi Valley, California. Hey, Ellen, what's up?
Well, good morning, Tom. I wanted to just talk about something historically happening in my family. And this is, I couldn't go to the Women's March. Mm-hmm. And over 100 years ago, my great-grandmother died from a back alley abortion because she had 4 children and she was going to have another. She couldn't afford to feed them. And so she went and did that. She ended up with septicemia. Over 100 years. I can't believe this. I thought that it would not come back to this again, and we just keep having to do this and fight and fight. I don't understand this. I mean, my own grandmother, I just don't get it. You know, even I found out about this when I was doing genealogy. I went up to the courthouse and to find out why she died, because it was something in the family that said, well, she killed herself on the courthouse steps. And I said, are you kidding me? And they gave me this book, and they said she died from childbirth. And the woman said, do you want the other book? And I said, what other book? Well, it showed in there that she died from septicemia because of a back alley abortion. Wow. And that just took me aback. I just couldn't believe it. And so then I dug into it more. When is it going to stop, Tom? When?
It'll stop it'll stop when enough women are in power that and the influence of religion has been diminished to the point that we stop as a government trying to control women's bodies. I mean, I think we're moving in the right direction.
It breaks my heart.
Yeah.
It breaks my heart. And to have young women now, I thought when Roe versus Wade came up, and I said, oh, good. And now they're breaking it down again. And I remember, it must have been about 30, 40 years ago in the LA Times, they had this article about these women, these rich women that couldn't have children. So they went to South America and they went to these other countries, and they had to stay there waiting for these children that they could get. And the husbands didn't like this, and they didn't like to spend that kind of money, and they wanted children that looked like them. And I thought, whoa, what is this? This is odd. Oh, see, what's going to happen here? And I'm thinking, oh, my heavens, we don't really have many orphanages anymore and have babies just out there everywhere. So what are they going to do?
So you think this is being motivated by people like John Roberts and his wife who couldn't have children, so they adopted 2 white babies, that there are, white people in America who want more white babies so that there can be more adoptions?
I don't know. I just thought that was an interesting article, and I said, where could this lead us?
Yeah.
Where would this lead us?
Well,
I still wonder about that.
I think the important point to note is that pre-Roe, and I was around pre-Roe, I knew 2 girls in high school who had abortions that I knew of. I knew the guys that got them pregnant, in fact. Both of them were upper middle class. They were able to, their parents just got them into the hospital, said they had bad menstrual cramps and had DNCs, which is how most early stage abortions were done back then, with a wink and a nod. But there was also a girl in my school who just stopped coming to school one day, and we learned later that she had died of a back alley abortion. And the difference between her and those other 2 was that I'm assuming, I didn't know her, but I'm assuming that the difference was that she didn't have the resources, or she didn't have the parental support to go check into St. Lawrence Hospital, and it wouldn't have been St. Lawrence, it's a Catholic hospital, but to check into Sparrow or Ingham Medical Hospital and get a DNC.
Right.
So even before
they go
Roe,
out of the country.
Right, but my point is that even before Roe, wealthy women were able to get abortions. They could leave the country to get abortions. There were some parts of the United States that had legalized abortion. Nevada, for example, I believe, and maybe New York State, I'm pretty sure, had legalized abortion before 1973. In fact, I think several states had legalized abortion prior to 73. So it was still possible. It was just expensive. And that's what we're going back to. That's what Texas is going back to. You're not going to see wealthy, upper middle class white women dying of septicemia from back alley abortions in Texas. They're going to hop on a plane and go to California. But you are going to see low income, and particularly women who are not U.S. citizens who are very reluctant to present themselves at a hospital. or any place else. You're going to start seeing low-income women, and because those are not the cute, wealthy blondes who Facebook and Twitter and the American media love to follow around, you know, the missing white girl syndrome, it's probably not going to get the kind of publicity that it would if you know, the wife of a well-known lawyer in Dallas were to die of a back alley abortion, because she's not. She's going to hop on a plane and go to California. So it's not going to end abortions. It's not going to even significantly reduce abortions, I don't think. I think what it's going to do is it's going to cause an increase in the death, misery, and by the way, the other consequence of back alley abortions very often is sterility, you know, which is a life-changing event for a woman. And you know, it's going to produce more of those consequences rather than ending abortions. And then you combine that with Texas now, you know, banning the morning after pill, and there being large conversations now starting all around the country from these right-wing groups, including some women's groups, about banning that are associated with the Catholic Church, about banning hormone-based birth control because it doesn't stop fertilization, it stops implantation, and therefore they think of it as an abortion anyway. It's going to get, you know, grim. I mean, it was only 1961 that the hormonal birth control pill was approved, and it really wasn't until 63, 64, 65 that it became into widespread use, and that, of course, kicked off the women's movement in the late 60s and early 70s. So
yes, I went through that. I know. I went through
yeah, I was there too. So,
and I thought, okay, we've got something, and you know, remembering my great grandmother, 1917, and she went through all this, and then to have this, and it just keeps getting worse and worse. My heart just aches. My heart just aches. I don't understand
Especially
it.
for the low
anyways,
income.
I just wanted to let you.
Yeah,
I just wanted to let you know about that.
Thank you, Ellen. Very, very well said. And especially for the low-income women in Texas. I mean, they're the ones who are bearing the brunt of this. Michael in Bronx, New York, you had a quick comment?
Yes, Tom. You know, the games that Mitch McConnell is playing, this is why I keep saying that they want to play games and keep lying to the American people, being two-faced, always doing 180 degrees. I want them put on put on the spot. Have them under oath, subpoena them and put them under oath. You were so fine with raising the debt ceiling back then for yourselves, but then when it comes to helping the American people, you always say no to this.
You don't need to put them under oath, Michael. Mitch McConnell will come right out and say, we're just messing with the Democrats because we can. We've got the power. We're going to use it. Ha, 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 screw you. I mean, that's his mantra.
And in my view, that's sabotaging democracy, that's sabotaging Biden's presidency, that's sabotaging the American people's needs. And in my view, that's treasonous as well.
Yeah, I don't think that is not giving aid and comfort to an enemy during time of war, but it is wrong. And it should be, I mean, morally wrong, politically wrong, and perhaps it'll backfire on him, although I don't know. Politics has gotten so tribalized, and he has this huge right-wing echo chamber to help him, so we'll see. We'll see. Paul in Woodinville, Washington. Hey, Paul, what's up?
So, Tom, my question for you this week is, when our republic fails in the next few years, do you want it to fail on our terms, progressive terms, or do you want it to fail in the terms of, let's say, soft fascism?
I don't understand your question, Paul.
Well, I just want to remind you, last week you said that I was saying we should split the sheets, and you said, you know, with the states, I'm referring to the, like you said today, 41% of Biden voters want the blue states to go their own way and the red states to go there. I'm one of those, by the way. And I said that let's split the sheets. And you said, what does that look like? But I failed to hold you to your own statement last week, which was, you said if Democrats don't win the election next year, at least hold their majorities or increase them in both houses, Senate and the House, and we will lose the election in 2024, and that's the end of our republic. That's what you said last Monday. And so my question for you is, then, if that happens, do you want that to fail? Do you want our republic to fail on our terms, as progressive terms, or on their terms? On
How does our republic fail on our terms, Paul?
Well, like I said, it's called letting the states that are prepared to, when the republic fails, are going to be on our terms. And
so, in other words, you're talking about secession.
Not necessarily. You see, those are I guess maybe you haven't been understanding what I've been saying is that I gave you the notion that the states should be laboratories of democracy, and those that succeed should succeed, and those that fail, like the red states, they should fail. And we shouldn't be helping them, dragging them out of country, always bailing them out.
But,
you see, they need
Paul,
us
there is
more than we
zero
need them.
chance that Democrats or Republicans are going to change the federal laws so that Kentucky no longer gets $3.50 for every dollar that they send to Washington, D.C., or that California continues to get only 70 cents for every dollar they send. There's no chance, zero chance. So that can't be what you're talking about.
No, so that I'm going to just interrupt you there because the people of this country do not have the political will to solve our damn problems. And you know what, Tom? I'm getting sick of thinking of things like ideas of how to reapportion taxation, like I said. Remember my idea about let the states pay the federal income, the federal
do away
tax,
with federal income tax. Nice idea. Again, there's no chance it'll ever pass.
That's right. It'll never. See, Democrats, when I say that, they say, "Oh, it's a great idea, but it'll never happen." Republicans say, and I say, "Oh, you'd love to get rid of the IRS," and they say, "Yeah, but you really can't."
Well, Republicans don't want to because the red states are poor. I mean, Democrats could. You could arguably convince Democrats of doing this, but you're going to have to build a movement to do that. I mean, it's literally not even on anybody's radar screen, Paul. It's going to take more than you and me.
The fact is, Tom, everybody's blowing smoke. Nobody really wants to I came up with the idea of the rotating bench on the Supreme Court, the 15-member court that has a 9-member bench. Democrats say it's a great idea, but it'll never happen. Republicans say, no, they don't want that because what they really want is to hold their stacked majority.
Well, you don't know that that's not going to, something like that's not going to come out of the, Joe Biden's study commission. I mean, it's entirely possible.
Nothing's going to happen. That's it.
Okay,
Nothing's going to happen.
All right, Paul, cynicism acknowledged. It's 47 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be right back with more of your calls in just a moment. Stick around. It's 48 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Let's see here. Ellie in Seattle. Hey, Ellie. Thanks for listening to KBCS. What's up?
Hey, I just want to say that I am a low-income 70-year-old feminist in Seattle, and I just thought I got to go to Austin. So I have this wonderful spiritual activist, and put me up, and we went there. And, of course, it was wonderful, and it was exciting to be not exciting to be actually there where it was all happening.
So you flew down to Austin, Texas for the Women's March? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I did.
Hey,
yeah,
how cool.
It was very cool. And there were a lot of what I call 12-year-old Gretas speaking incredibly. And the one comment I just want to say is there was a woman, maybe older than I am, that said, let me be perfectly clear. This is not about abortion. It is about controlling women.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, just like rape is typically not about sex, it's about power. And this is simply another form of rape, essentially. It's controlling a woman. That's amazing. Ellie, did you feel safe flying down there? You're the first person I've talked to who's been on an airplane.
I actually just flew from Calgary the other day. After they had a emergency shutdown. But I do have to say that Abbott, because I didn't really even know he was the governor, I hate to say it, but he said, it's good for the economy that the women get to take buses and stuff to Oklahoma and other states to get their abortions. That's very...
Because they're buying their bus tickets in Texas.
Yeah, really. And I worked for the Feminist Women's Health Center in San Diego, and 6 weeks, the fetus is not even contained in the sac, and so there's more chance of retained tissue and infection if you have an early abortion. That's the fact. And so it's just it's not a win-win situation.
Yeah, and it's not even a fetus at that point. I believe it's called a zygote. It's the size of a grain of rice, and it's got a tail.
Correct. Yeah. There's not even.
And
that.
there's no heart to beat. It's just some muscles.
Yeah,
it's just some muscle tissue that's got an electrical pulse going to it.
Yeah. But I just want to say I did it, and I'm glad I did it, and keep going.
Okay. Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yep. Stephen in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hey, Stephen, we got a minute. What's up?
Hey, Tom, your first caller was talking about Ayn Rand and how brilliant she was and everything, but she also, at the end of her life, like most Republicans, when they get sick and need help, all of a sudden they need our Social Security, our Medicare, and any treatments for her lung cancer, I guess she had, or whatever it was.
She did.
But
she was a lifelong smoker.
Yeah, but towards the end of their life, it's like I have relatives the same way. As soon as they started getting sick, boy, they sure worship the Veterans Administration hospitals, and sure we're glad to have all of the help they could get from social
medicine
programs.
Right? Yeah, exactly. And Ayn Rand, I'm surprised that that's not a larger part of her legacy. That she died on Social Security and Medicare, and
she had money. I mean, she was getting money from her books.
Right. She had some royalties and things. Yeah, absolutely. Stephen, thank you. Thanks for adding to the contributing to the conversation. 52 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be back with more of your calls and the news of the day right after this. Stick around. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind on your call for this week?
Hey, Tom. Hey, I wanted to maybe disagree with you just a little bit because, all right, there was all this discussion about could Liz Cheney dethrone Donald Trump, okay? And I put a lot of thought behind this. It's not possible, and I'll tell you why. I mean, obviously, Trump is not Adolf Hitler, okay? But Trump and Hitler did have one thing in common. I call it the Hitler clown car and the Trump clown car. Hitler did the same thing. There were people clowns jumping on and off the Hitler clown car. Trump has the same sort of thing.
It's because they were both very, very erratic guys. They were damaged narcissists with hair trigger tempers who lashed out at people who even remotely confronted them, and who lavished power and wealth on people who slavishly, if I'm pronouncing that word right, praised them.
Well, yeah, and also they are a vehicle for the real fascists. And I mean, like Donald Trump, I'm not 100% sure he can even comprehend fascism. Right. But all right, we are already at the Verstaat. It was von Blomberg. It was Werner von Blomberg, who was he was like the defense secretary for Nazi Germany. The Verstaat, or the defense state, is an essential ingredient to Nazi fascism that the others did not have. I'm talking about Franco and Mussolini. But we have it here. About the only thing really missing is we don't all right, Trump voters are like proto-fascists. All right, they want to build a wall.
The only thing missing is what, Dave?
Okay, the only thing missing is profit in hatred. The Nazis figured it out. All right, there is a lot of profit to be made.
Oh, hey, look at the Trump rallies. They are selling T-shirts and hats and post. There's lots of profit and hatred here in the United States. Tyrone in Harlem, New York. Hey, Tyrone, what's up?
Hey, how you doing, Tom?
Good.
Tom, good. We have a problem of accepting people for who they present themselves to be. Mitch McConnell is who he is. Donald Trump is who he is. Our problem is we don't accept that this person is the despicable individuals that they present themselves to be. And our problem also is that when you build a system on racial hatred, inequality, and you think that it should work out perfectly, you're fooling yourself. Yeah. This is why we have that divide of these people wanting to bring back the good old days of the Confederacy. They want to separate red from blue. These people have been this way, and they're going to continue to be this way. Now, I'm a melanated person, and I've come to the realization that there's a certain segment of the American population that have never liked me and will never like me as a human being, will never look at me as a human being, because this is something that's ingrained in people. We know that people are supposed to change. We know that they are supposed to be good in everybody, but we forget that they are also evil in some people. And we got to understand when they present it to us, say, wait a minute, you're showing me something about yourself that I need to accept.
Yeah, I think that I completely agree with you, Tyrone, and I would add that I think the one statement you made was actually profound, which is you can't expect a consistent good outcome from a system that was built on hate and I would add, slavery and things like that. Yes. We are going through all these struggles right now with Mitch McConnell having the power to blow up the debt ceiling and all this stuff, all as a result of slavery in the United States. The filibuster was put into place to protect slavery. The Second Amendment was put into place to protect slavery. We've got a nationwide gun epidemic, deaths in the United States, mass shootings. There's all this stuff that came out of slavery that is still damaging this country and that is animating the Republican Party, the racial animus and hatred there too. And we got to clean this thing up. And the Republicans' response to that is, let's not even talk about it in our schools. I'm saying we need to clean it up. Tyrone, brilliant. Thank you very much for the call. We'll be right back with the Independent Women's Forum.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
We say fight back!
Today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Common Sense for the 21st Century by Roger Hallam. The subtitle, Only Nonviolent Rebellion Can Now Stop Climate Breakdown and Social Collapse. This is from the foreword. I was there for the past 20 years. Climate activism. It didn't work. We protested in our hundreds of millions. It didn't work. We raised billions to reach people and politicians. It didn't work. We signed countless online petitions. They didn't work. We looked to the United Nations to resolve the crisis. It didn't work. We trusted progressive politicians and their reforms. That didn't work. Al Gore had a big concert and a PR campaign. It didn't work. Countless NGOs, non-governmental organizations, did their best, and it didn't work. I worked with green NGO campaigns, champagne environmentalists, and lying politicians. I was wasting my time. I had a clue back in 2007 that there might be a fundamental flaw with the reformist approach. The problem with the political influence of the industrial billionaires like the Koch brothers and other fossil fuel bosses. It was another warm night in Los Angeles. I was invited to an exclusive event. A Tesla Roadster prototype was going to be shown to press and guests. We took turns riding around the block. I watched in amazement as the Tesla was at the end of the street in the blink of an eye, with barely a sound. I felt like a caveman seeing a television. Incredible. While I was working on a campaign in 2007, I had an idea for how to save the world with a massive music event and a huge fundraising effort led by celebrities to fund the biggest PR campaign to save the environment. It would be a huge global event, just like Live Aid. I sought out a prominent journalist at the Tesla event to tell about my scheme and bask in the glory of his praise. The journalist was Vijay Vithsaswaram from The Economist, now a life member of this Council on Foreign Relations. After listening carefully to my concept, he smiled and laughed. I was stunned. Laughter? How could I be so wrong? Vijay wasn't being cruel or unkind. He thought I was naive. He said, "The fossil fuel industry has enough money to outspend any public relations campaign you might try by 100 times. He carried on talking, but I had stopped listening. I had my answer. He was right. Crestfallen, I sheepishly nodded and walked away. Over the next 12 years, I watched as fossil fuel companies used their vast financial capital to buy political parties, trick NGOs into fruitless schemes like the U.S. Cap and Trade Initiative, sow doubt about climate science in the public discourse, and slow policy reform to a snail's pace. Their strategy worked. As climate skepticism continued to spread, climate change mitigation dropped down voters' priorities. With Trump and Putin in power, it was over. I quit climate campaigning. Then I heard about Extinction Rebellion closing 5 bridges in London. Then they closed central London in April 2019. This was something different. I met Roger Hallam and he explained his ideas for a radical plan to create real change. This included, first, tell the truth. Climate skepticism was pushed by the mainstream media, which spread doubt on climate science like a plague, leaving inaction in its wake. The scale of the crisis is being played down, and we must get the truth out. Second, nonviolent civil disobedience. We need to get arrested, tens of thousands of us, more. No more protests, no more petitions. Instead, nonviolent civil disobedience, lots of it, and on a large scale. Close down cities until the politicians take action, or until the people do. Third, universalism. In other words, the ecological and climate crisis should not be owned by any political ideology, culture, age, or gender. As Roger Hallam says, we all have a stake in the future. We should all be allowed to engage in action. I was convinced. We need a new approach to save ourselves and the planet. We need to spark a worldwide rebellion. We need some common sense for the 21st century. That foreword was written by, quote, anonymous climate activist. So this now is the introduction to the book. It is time to grow up and see the world as it is. There are some things which are undeniably real. There are some things we cannot change, and one of those is the law of physics. Ice melts when the temperature increases. Crops die in a drought. Trees burn in forest fires. Because these things are real, we can also be certain about what the future holds. We are now heading into a period of extreme ecological collapse. Whether or not this leads to the extinction of the human species largely depends on whether revolutionary changes happen within our societies within the next decade. This is not a matter of ideology, but of simple math and physics. The United Nations has estimated that we need to reduce carbon emissions by half within a decade to have a 50% chance of avoiding a global catastrophe. Of course, this is likely to be an underestimate, as recent science shows permafrost melting 90 years earlier than forecasted and Himalayan glaciers melting twice as fast as expected. The book, Common Sense for the 21st Century, by Roger Hallam, the co-founder of the Extinction Rebellion. The subtitle, Only Nonviolent Rebellion Can Now Stop Climate Breakdown and Social Collapse.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. On the line with us is May Davis, visiting legal scholar with the Independent Women's Forum, IWF.org. May Mailman is May's Twitter handle, M-A-Y Mailman, or IWF for the Independent Women's Forum, IWF.org. May, welcome to the program. You wrote an op-ed here for the Independent Women's Forum titled "The Soft Bigotry of Liberal Election Lawyers Will Backfire." You want to give us the Cliff Notes version?
I do, and thanks for having me on your show. I think it's really important and amazing intellectual capacity of your listeners to hear all sorts of viewpoints, and I'm grateful for the service you are doing to our nation. But the Cliff Notes version is we see a lot of litigation being filed in Texas and in Georgia. And my thesis basically is, well, is it that these laws are particularly racist, or is there something else going on? And I think there's something else going on. I think this is about ginning up momentum, I guess you could call it, but also inflaming the racial divide. These states don't have particularly unique laws. They're similar to a lot of other states where we don't see litigation.
You're talking about the Republican-controlled states that are passing what the Democrats are referring to as voter suppression laws.
Exactly. Okay. And so you've got other states that have roughly similar, maybe a few days extra voting here, a few days less here, but not completely different. Voter ID laws are pretty standard, for example. So, questioning why are we picking these states? But then the other thing is I do take issue with the suggestion that minorities are unable to comply with reasonable voting restrictions. In Mississippi, black voters showed up in higher rates than white voters, and Mississippi has some of the strictest laws in the country. And then also, when you tell people that the system is rigged against you and the system is not working for you and the system is racist, people begin to internalize it. And I saw that especially happen to Republicans in Georgia, where Republicans didn't show up to vote because the system is rigged against you. This type of voting system doesn't work for you.
Because they believe Donald Trump.
Exactly. So you had Donald Trump and a lot of other people, I think, also at that time saying, we don't know about this type of voting. We don't know. And so what happens to people? They stayed home, and that hurt Republicans. And what happens when that happens to Democrats? You tell minorities, the system is rigged against you. It's harder for you to vote. And then does that bring up a feeling of empowerment in the system? And I think it really doesn't.
I suspect that there's something very different between having the President of the United States or a guy running for President of the United States tell his voters that the voting machines are rigged, that the system is rigged, that their vote won't be counted, that it's all, because Trump was anticipating that he was going to lose to Hillary Clinton. He was using this rhetoric even long before he won the 2016 election. And I think, and there is some evidence that in that and subsequent elections, Republicans didn't show up in some cases because they thought, hey, it's rigged, screw it. But I think that's a qualitatively different thing from being told that in Harris County, in Dallas, with 5 million people or more, instead of having 14 districts where you can have drop-off boxes for your ballots, we're gonna make you have only one. or being told that your local precinct where you've been voting for years and years, that's been run every single year by a local person that you know who lives in your neighborhood, and frankly, in the case, since you're talking about race here, in a black neighborhood, it's being run by a black person who's a friend and a member of the community. Now that person has been replaced by a white Republican who doesn't live in the community because Texas and Georgia have changed their laws so that basically the Republican power structure can take over the local voting system. And then that person decides when you show up to vote whether you get an actual ballot or a provisional ballot, knowing that, in a large percentage of the cases, provisional ballots don't get counted. And in the first pass count, provisional ballots never get counted. That kind of explicit voter suppression, which is now law in some 20 states that are all controlled by Republicans, that I don't think that that's going to discourage voters the way Trump lying about the whole thing is rigged. I think, I do think, though, that it's going to reduce the count because, if you can increase and also you got the 2018 decision by the Supreme Court that said that, if Ohio wants to purge people from the voting rolls in largely black communities, that's fine. It's entirely up to the state. And so now you've got states that are going into counties that are heavily Democratic, particularly heavily black, but also heavily Democratic, places where there's a lot of students or a lot of retired people, Social Security voters, and simply purging people off the voting rolls. Willy-nilly, with no supervision and in fact, their ability to do that has been enhanced by these laws. So when those people show up at the polls, they're not on the list, so they get a provisional ballot. And again, the provisional ballots, the only way to get your provisional ballot counted if you've been purged is to show up 2 or 3 days later at the Secretary of State's office or the local county recorder's office and say, here I am, here's my ID, I shouldn't have been purged. And nobody does that. So I think that it could have some impact, but I think you're trying to compare apples to oranges, May.
Well, I do think you're right. There are differences between people who maybe have had a friend experience something like you said, where a provisional ballot doesn't get counted, versus maybe in Georgia, there was no reason for somebody to not vote because the story didn't happen to their friend. It was sort of spoken of at a higher level. But I think the larger point is, how should we encourage voters to vote? Because I do think that if you are an American and you want to vote, you can vote. It doesn't matter what the color of your skin is. It doesn't matter whether you're a man or a woman. It doesn't matter if you're rich or poor. If you want to vote, you can vote. And
tell that to Martin Luther King's cousin, who at 92, who had voted in the same precinct for 60 years, showed up to vote in the last election and discovered that Brian Kemp had purged her from the voting rolls. At first, they refused to even let her in. A reporter showed up, and then they gave her a provisional ballot, and it was never counted.
But that has to do with, like you said, purging the voter rolls, which maybe there's a...
Which is now legal in 20 states, and the Supreme Court has said is legitimate as a political strategy.
And not as a political strategy. As
they said you can't do it as a racial strategy, but if you're doing it as a political strategy, read the case in the Ohio case in 2018.
It's a basic necessity that people not be enrolled to vote in multiple places.
Forgive my interrupting, but we do have a limited time. Can we take this to a 30,000-foot view for a second?
Yes.
We used to use biometrics in the United States. When I was 7 years old, my mom was the person who checked people in to vote down at the elementary school where I went. And she would compare your signature to the signature on file. You had to show ID when you first registered to vote. This was back, I'm talking about like when I was 7 years old, it was 1968, or 1958, excuse me. And you had to show ID when you registered to vote, but then every year when you voted, you signed the card, and my mom would compare that card to the original registration if the signature looked the same. That's a biometric identifier. Signatures are harder to fake than fake IDs are to buy. I can buy a fake ID in a dozen different names tomorrow. I can't change my signature. That worked in the United States for 100 years. It worked very, very effectively. We also have states that have mail-in voting. We've got 5 states now that are all mail-in voting. I'm in one of them, Oregon. We've been doing mail-in voting for more than 20 years, and we've never had any instances of fraud or apparent fraud. I mean, there have been a couple, maybe 3 or 4 questionable things, but I mean, literally nothing that would affect any election at all. Why does the Republican Party say biometrics, which is actually safer and harder to fake than an ID, we're going to discard that and we're going to go with an ID that can be expensive to get, and for people like my friend Jerry, who's lived in New York City for his entire life and has never had a driver's license because he's never owned a car, he lives in New York City, that he's going to have to, you know, jump through hoops and oppose mail-in voting. I don't get it.
Well, I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all solution. For some states, they do still allow for signature matching. And each state, you know, and now we're moving into real IDs, so the ease of which you could buy a fake ID in the past is certainly, for most states now, the situation, and is.
But in Texas, you don't need a real ID. You can use your gun registration. But not your college registration. Tell me this isn't weird.
Well, there's also just a lot more people.
Why any ID at all when you come to vote? Why not simply verify your signature? It's the hardest thing to fake there is.
When you get on a plane or when you go to the liquor store or when you do anything else, you always have to show your ID. It's become standard in our society.
Because that's how you determine your age or you know that you are. You know, that your name is spelled the way it's spelled on the ticket and all that kind of thing. That's apples and oranges. I don't get why, you know. And then you got like North Dakota, the most Republican state in the union. You've got saying, you know, they don't even have voter registration. You just show up and vote.
Well, like I said, there's only a few reasons why there's these lawsuits in certain states. And yeah, in some, North Dakota, it might not be there because they already have the most lax voting laws in the nation. But in others, Wyoming, which does have more strict voter restrictions, we don't see it because this is not actually about what is or isn't racist about a certain voting law. This is about, I want to create racial tension, my side versus your side, tribalism. Some people are trying to prevent you from voting, when really IDs are part of our natural existence. I mean, it's like breathing to bring your ID with you when you leave your house. And so to use that as also, I'm going to use your identification for voting, just seems normal.
Okay, and you know, I'll give you that. It's almost certainly not going to go away. It's become part of America. You mentioned in your article that we're not talking here about terrorist groups blockading the polls. Yet the governor of Texas, or maybe it's the lieutenant governor, has said that he wants to have 10,000 poll watchers, and you've got the Proud Boys volunteering. What's going on with that?
So poll watching, I think, it's becoming more and more of a problem because you only have some people taking videos here, which makes it look like there's something wrong going on, and just have more people to have more vantage points in today's age of social media is probably a good idea. Okay. May, I'm sorry, we're hitting a hard break here at 18 minutes after. I can't push it any farther than that. Thank you very much for dropping by. Thank you. You're welcome. Thank you. May Davis, visiting legal scholar at the Independent Women's Forum. Her Twitter handle is MAY Mailman, and IWF.org.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. And welcome back. Courtney in Brooklyn, New York. Courtney, it says here you're watching us on Facebook, but I just read that Facebook has gone down all over the world. Is it working for you?
Well, I'm not impartial to Facebook, but I'm watching you now on YouTube.
Oh, okay. Okay, that makes sense then.
That's probably it's just my phone. Yeah. My phone is hooked up there.
No, I mean what it means is that at some point in the past, the first time you called in, you must have been watching on Facebook because Joyce puts it on there and then it stays in the database. Anyhow, I'll update that to YouTube. So what's up, Courtney?
Hey there, I have two points to address. First, it seems like the two Santa Claus theory you've been discussing in the past is still manifesting itself and echoing through politics with Biden and the infrastructure bill. Yep. Because he's talking about how the Republicans are creating obstacles for him to get this done and threatening him with a filibuster. And in the previous administration with Donald Trump, they spent about $8 trillion and that was when the Republican was in office, and now since Biden, which is a Democrat, is in office, they're putting obstacles in front of him. And that brings me to the second point, which is a bit of a segue. Kathy Hochul, she replaced Governor Cuomo, and she's pushing for vaccine mandates. But to touch back on Donald Trump, Governor Cuomo was supposed to be the person to prosecute Trump on a state level, because for all of his tax fraud and other criminal activities, he was
No, that's going to be Letitia James, actually, Courtney. She's the Attorney General for the state. And she is going after Trump right now. Yeah, no, the governor doesn't. He doesn't play the role of prosecutor. He's the administrator. But the chief cop for New York State is Letitia James, and she has. And people are speculating that she wants to be governor, but she's the AG right now, and she has been gathering. I believe she's got a grand jury together. I mean, she's going after Trump. She said so.
All right then. Well, that's encouraging to hear. But those are my points, because Biden, I was just watching him earlier, and it just reminds me of the two Santa Claus theory that you was talking about, when Republicans are in office and they are in power, that they spend as much, they raise the debt as much as they can, and as soon as a Democrat comes in, they put all the roadblocks up, and it's exactly what's taking place now with the infrastructure bill.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It absolutely is, and it's a political philosophy that was laid out in 1974 in the Wall Street Journal by Judah Wanniski, and he called it the two Santa Claus theory. Pointing out that Democrats had always been viewed as Santa Claus, and Americans loved them for it, and Republicans had always been viewed as Scrooge because they said no to everything from Social Security to unemployment insurance, and that's why they were losing elections. So Republicans had to become tax cut Santa Clauses and spend like drunken politicians during when they've got power, and then all of a sudden start yelling and screaming about the deficits, as they're doing right now. I mean, this is the essence of the debt ceiling debate, even though it's allowing the government to pay off Donald Trump's $7 trillion in debts. But yeah, good point, Courtney. Good point. Thank you very much for the call. I appreciate it. It's 22 minutes past the hour. We'll be back in just a moment. Stick around. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. So the Republican Party has sold themselves all the way back to the 60s, really, as the serious party. We're the party of issues. We take stuff seriously. We have serious policy analysis. We have serious constitutional analysis. We are serious about the economy. We have all these think tanks, Heritage and Competitive Enterprise and Cato, and we've got the Federalist Society finding serious judges that we can put on the federal bench, and in response to 4 dead Americans, they got real serious. 5 House committees, 2 Senate committees. They created a separate House Select Committee for 4 dead Americans. That was Benghazi. Thousands of hours of testimony. The Secretary of State testifying for 8 hours straight. But when 5 people die at the Capitol, not so much. Got a new video about it over at ThomHartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And there was something else that, let me just get back to my one sheet here. We are Geeky Science. This is absolutely fascinating. First of all, before I go through all this, there are vegetarian alternatives to this, and they mention this at the end of the article. Alpha-linolenic acid is found in flax seeds, walnuts, and some vegetable oils, and can be an option for vegetarians. So, with that caveat, there's a fascinating piece by Jane Brody in the New York Times, and she's citing a new study that was published January 31st in the journal Cardiology, the Journal of the American Medical Association's Cardiology, of 77,917 older adults, 10 different trials, older adults who are at risk of cardiovascular disease. We have been told that taking fish oil capsules will prevent us from getting heart disease and other, bad conditions that nobody wants. And that conclusion was arrived at by scientists looking at the fact that people who ate diets rich in fatty fish, and by rich I'm talking about 1 or 2 portions a week, that people who ate diets like that, particularly like, in Scandinavia, had much, much lower levels of heart disease than did people who ate no fish at all. So the assumption that was made was that it must be the oil in the fish. And suddenly this huge industry that came out of kind of the waste byproduct of the fishing industry, fish oil, grew, and suddenly everybody in America is taking fish oil capsules. But the fish oil capsules themselves had not been studied until recently. And, in many observational studies, they note, because these supplements contain omega-3 fatty acids, again, the things that are in flaxseed and walnuts. And in many observational studies, people who regularly consume fish two or more times a week were less likely to suffer heart attacks, strokes, and cardiovascular events than those who ate fish infrequently or not at all. What they're finding now is that while fish oil has some effect, it does lower the risk of heart disease and total death, that it's actually eating the fish. Again, quoting from the article, large population studies with solid data both on the participants' diet and causes of disease and death bolstered the beliefs that eating fish lowered the risk of death from heart disease by more than 1/3 and total deaths by 17%. So, fish oil good, apparently fish a whole lot better. Plus it helps the developing brains of children. Interesting stuff. We'll be back. It's 27 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I should add, I'm a vegan who once or twice a month eats salmon. That's pretty much it. What can I say? Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Beyond the Valley by Ramesh Srinivasan. This is from Chapter 1, The Power of Data. In November 2017, my Apple MacBook Pro was stolen. It happened on the island of Ibiza, where I was visiting my friend, a documentary filmmaker. We were thinking of making a series of short films to illustrate innovative uses of new technology around the world. We sat together writing down examples of technological innovation, subversion, and creativity we'd already witnessed. We discussed themes I explore in this book, such as surveillance, the gig economy, and the future of work, artificial intelligence, and cryptocurrencies. After uploading our ideas to Google's cloud-based storage platform, Google Drive, we took a short break, locking our laptops in the trunk of our rented car. When we returned, both laptops were gone. Although upset, I was also relieved. I'd be able to recover most of my data because almost all of it was in the cloud. That was what I signed on to when I stored my files with Google as well as with Apple, Microsoft, and Dropbox. But in the bargain, I'd allowed them to profit from my data. It dawned on me, given the terms of service I'd agreed to, that the value of the data of my data to the storage companies was far greater than the value of my laptop to the thief. How many of us are fully aware that companies providing us with cloud storage have ways to monetize our data? They use targeted advertising, for instance, and charge fees once we get hooked on the security and peace of mind that their free services offer. We put faith in these companies to store our files securely, but our private information may no longer remain private if, let's say, the government asks to search through our data. It's also not private because all this data is surveilled, computed, and often manipulated in mysterious ways to influence and shape our behaviors
as these corporations see fit. By creating accounts with these companies, we give them access to ourselves. So when we consent to privacy policies, in reality, we're signing on to systems of surveillance never before seen in human history. And we do so without being included or consulted. By desiring to keep our data accessible and recoverable, we lock ourselves into using their services. As I thought about getting my files back in Ibiza, I wondered, does access to my own property have to come with such strings attached? In my relationship to Apple, I find the strings impossible to untie. By purchasing an Apple laptop, I had unwittingly transformed from a customer into a part of the company's product line. I had provided Apple with private data and trusted Apple to protect it. Now, to retrieve that data, I had to purchase a new laptop with Apple-owned peripherals and devices. So I caught the next flight to Madrid. I then took the train to the city's Apple store located in Puerta del Sol. In many ways, this central plaza still serves in its centuries-old role as a landmark and gathering place for the entire Spanish nation, a point from which numerous roads emanate. With its distinctive aesthetic and its strategic placement in a civic space, the Apple Store stood out among the adjacent parliamentary and government buildings as if the global brand were more powerful than Spain itself. The day I was there, more people entered and left the Apple Store than passed through the doors of my neighboring building. In 2017, Apple, a private corporation worth more than $1 trillion, actually began to conceptualize its retail stores as town squares, thereby branding itself an integral part of our everyday lives. Other big technology corporations describe themselves in similar terms. Facebook CEO and founder Mark Zuckerberg, for instance, refers to the company as a social infrastructure for the global community. So what we have in the digital world are privately owned public spheres. They're branded as public, civic, and virtuous, but in reality are dominated by a single logic, extending profitability and economic value. How can these companies' interests be the same as the public interest? Like many other large corporations, Apple is shareholder-owned and therefore primarily accountable to its investors and executives, rather than to its employees, customers, or the general public. I had not begun to unpack the meaning of all this until I realized how monumental the Puerta del Sol Apple Store actually was, as an icon and a structure. As I walked into the store, an Apple employee invited me to purchase a new machine, log on to my iCloud account, and retrieve from Apple Cloud Storage the data that I lost from my stolen laptop. These transactions, completed in less than an hour, were simple and efficient. My data was extraterritorial, easily retrievable in Spain, and likely would be in most other countries. Purchasing a new laptop and getting my data back supported Apple's economic model. National borders were no threat or hindrance. The same was true with retrieving data I had stored on other corporate cloud servers managed by Google and Dropbox. In technology circles, this saying has made the rounds. If you're not the customer, then you're the product. Many of today's technologies come to us for free, but in return, our personal lives come for free to these technologies. But they are accessible for the company's profit and gain. Yes, when we search Google, we look for information, but do we realize that Google is also searching us? Users, and it goes on from there. So the book is Beyond the Valley by Ramesh Srinivasan.
Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. So we have a new video up over at ThomHartmann.com. It's about 18 U.S. Code 2384, which is a law that was published back in or put on the books on June 25th, 1948. It was updated in 1956. And it's very, very straightforward. It says, if two or more persons in any state or territory or in any place subject to the jurisdiction of the United States conspire to overthrow, put down, or destroy by force the government of the United States, or to levy war against them, or to oppose by force the authority thereof, or by force to prevent, hinder, or delay the execution of any law of the United States, or by force to seize, take, or possess any property of the United States, They shall be fined under this title or imprisoned for not more than 20 years or both. Tell me that doesn't perfectly describe what happened on January 6th. Seditious conspiracy. The video's at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and Pam in Chicago. Hey, Pam, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I always appreciate, Tom, your guests, your research, and the research that the whole team does there. It's so appreciated.
Thank you.
Gosh, because I guess your guests couldn't understand about voting, right, and the suppression, and the fact that we didn't even have any voter fraud,
right.
But yet laws are being changed across the state. It's just so obvious. Tom, I wanted to talk about, we had the protest regarding the abortion laws, and it didn't get nearly enough media coverage, and I'm not surprised because that's what they do when it seems to be, I guess, a left-wing protest, so to speak. Mm. So, Tom, here's my concern. With abortion, you had Representatives Jayapal, Bush, and Barbara Lee testify, correct, and had to tell their personal accounts. Mm-hmm. Well, now we need their male counterparts, Tom, to come forth and tell about how they forced their girlfriends, their mistresses, and whomever they told or paid for an abortion. Because we know that part of the story is not being told. And I want to know, does that make sense to you? Because it frustrates me. They had to bare their souls about that. But the men who have done similar things won't have to come forth, even though they should, and talk about that experience.
Right.
Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense, Pam, and I could see a new kind of fetal heartbeat law, although at 6 weeks, the fetus doesn't even have an amniotic sac, so you can't really do DNA testing at that stage of development to determine, who the father is. You really can't do that until after I believe the third month or thereabouts. But I'm no expert on this, but I know it takes a while.
Sure.
But let me just finish this thought real quick, Pam, and I'll toss it back to you. So what I'm saying is that at the moment that it is possible to, without harming the mother or the child, at the moment it's possible to definitely certify, in the event of a dispute, who the father of that child is. That is the moment that the law should step in and say, okay, that father is now responsible for child support. That father is now responsible for at least 50% of all costs associated with having this child. That father is, and will have that legal responsibility until that child reaches the age of 18, no matter what, and hold men to it. And I think that if laws like that started getting passed, you would suddenly see the anti-abortion movement evaporate. What do you think?
I agree. I can't argue that point at all. And then, Tom, I'm just going to leave you with this. I'm going to, and you can maybe have your callers address this, or you can add on to this. If men could get pregnant, there would be abortion clinics in where? And I'm going to say in every strip club. You see what I'm saying, Tim? So, Tom, if you want to play with that, and I know it's a serious issue, but, I just thought about this. I thought about all the places where abortions would be available if men could get pregnant.
Yeah, places where they do oil changes.
There
absolutely.
You go, Tom.
Yeah, I saw.
You know exactly what I'm expressing.
Yeah, I saw a meme over the weekend that said Republicans hate abortion until the stripper gets pregnant.
Exactly.
So there you go.
And how must you hate women that you want to force them to have a baby if it's if they're impregnated because of incest or rape?
Yeah.
I mean, that's hatred for women.
Yeah, I'm with you. Pam, thank you for the call. Amy in Kokomo, Indiana. Hey, Amy, what's on your mind today?
I'm one of the few people that has polycystic ovaries, that the hormone that overproduces it makes me suicidal. I've been suicidal since I was a preteen. And when in my late 30s, my marriage went bad, decided to take birth control. And ever since, I've been on continuous hormonal birth control, I've not been suicidal at all.
So,
and then I also have.
Forgive me, Amy, but your phone is kind of muffled. Let me just recap what I think I heard you say. You are one of the women, and there is a not inconsequential but small slice of all women who have actual medical conditions that can be cured by hormonal birth controls. Most often it has to do with irregular periods or painful periods, things like that. But yours showed up as severe depression, suicidal depression, and when you went on hormonal birth control pills, that went away. So your life would be literally put at risk if the second stage of this war on women, which is already starting to surface in state legislatures outlawing hormonal birth control pills, were to go into effect. Is that your point?
Yeah, and then also I've had friends that in the late 70s, she was turning jaundice. She had to get an abortion. And then my sister, if she has another child, dies from giving birth.
Wow.
So this abortion law and this hormonal birth control laws that they're working on, I'm not happy with.
Yeah, I get it. I'm with you. I'm completely with you. This really should be, these medical decisions should be between a woman and a doctor, and the whatever you want to call it, family decision, moral decision, religious decision, personal decision, economic decision, certainly in the first trimester of pregnancy, arguably in the second, but certainly in the first, should be 100% absolutely up to the woman, and the state should have no business in this. And this whole thing about going after birth control pills, it's crazy. Amy, thank you. Thank you. Well said. Rose in Sierra, and thank you for sharing your story, Amy. Oh, there we go. Rose in Sierra County, New Mexico. Hey, Rose, what's up?
Hi. First of all, thank you so much for the way you educate us. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
I wanted to bring up a risk of an unforeseen consequence, maybe, of not being able to get an abortion when you need one. And that is that if your rapist has a lot of money and connections and influence, he can come back later and sue for custody, and in some cases win. I lost custody of my child by rape, and one of the women in my recovery cohort was forced into shared custody with her rapist, had to see him every other week.
Oh, my God.
What's wrong? It's a nightmare.
This is in New Mexico? That's the state law? I'm assuming it's because he was never convicted of rape. You knew that you knew that it was rape, but there was not a legal process, and therefore you couldn't separate yourself from him.
Correct.
Yeah. Yeah, this is, and again, what business is it of the government to determine whether you were, quote, actually raped or, or not, or whatever, I mean, there used to be this whole idea of these gray areas of date rape and things, and I think increasingly people are going, without consent, it's rape, period, full stop, right? And yeah, this is I'm so sorry to hear that, Rose. Thank you for your testimony. I appreciate it. David in Tyler, Texas. Hey, David, what's on your mind?
Well, a lot of things that's been talked about today, but the Women's March, we had one in Tyler, Texas, and about 200 people there. And I called you about Tyler once before, a year ago, when you were talking about Portland, people being attacked in Portland. And it happened on the square in Tyler at the same time. But at this march, one of the women went and talked to a militia guy that was there on this deal and asked him why he was there. And he said that he was there in case we broke any windows.
You're kidding.
No. And, it actually even made the news here. And they did cover the story a little bit. Yeah. But,
That's amazing. That's amazing. These guys, yeah, we're the cops. We're the cops. Right. We have police. David, thank you. We have police for a reason. To keep order, to maintain, civil society. We don't need yahoos with AR-15s to be doing that same thing. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
More of your calls right after the break. Stick around. And welcome back. Nettie in Melbourne, Florida. Hey, Nettie, thank you for watching us on YouTube. What's on your mind?
Oh, hi. I just want to make a comment. I have a grandniece, and she was in her, she had her sixth pregnancy. It would in her sixth child last year, but it was ectopic, you know, the fallopian tube pregnancy.
Yeah, isn't that ectopic, or am I?
I'm not. Yeah, I don't. I wasn't sure how to pronounce it.
Outside the fallopian tube, yeah.
But she, and she's a religious nut.
Right.
And they took care of it, you know. And so I told her grandmother to tell her, you know, wouldn't God have taken care of that? You know, that's an abortion to me.
Right.
You know, anyways, that's all I wanted to say. How, you know, it's always an excuse, you know. I mean, I know it's life-threatening. I think she should have it, you know, but it just kills me how they can look at it one way, you know, like, I don't know. Anyway, she's pregnant again, her sixth child.
Yeah. Well, and let's hope it works out well for her. But I think the big issue here, Nettie, is the question of the power of the state. And this is one of those areas where I would agree with the old-fashioned conservatives, the old Ronald Reagan conservatives, who would say that state power should only be exercised when absolutely necessary. And, you know, determining whether a woman is going to have an abortion certainly in the first 3 months of a pregnancy, should not be the role of the state, in my opinion. Nettie, I got to move along, but thank you for the call, and thanks for the personal story. Richard in Ypsilanti, Michigan. Hey, Richard, what's up? Yeah, hi, Tom.
I wish you could kind of help me understand where Joe Manchin is coming from. Mm-hmm. He's senator of one of the poorest states in the union. Yeah. He's trying to lowball that infrastructure bill, mm-hmm. and it seems like that would just be a boon to his state if they
it would.
That.
It would be tremendously helpful to him. The problem is that Joe Manchin gets big bucks from pharma. His daughter was the head of a major pharmaceutical company, Mylan Pharmaceuticals. And Joe Manchin has started 3 different coal companies. He's a coal baron and a multimillionaire as a result of being a coal baron. And now he's into natural gas, or it appears that his son is anyway. And the state is big time into natural gas. And so the fossil fuel industry is also supporting Joe Manchin. And you know, he's got to dance to the tune of the people who are paying his bills.
Yeah, well, yeah, so he doesn't want his taxes or the taxes of his friends raised, or the corporation.
Well, I think there's that too. Yeah, you know, Biden is saying that all of this is going to be paid for by raising taxes on people who make over $400,000 a year. Well, last year, Joe Biden made $500,000 just from his coal companies. So, and he doesn't want his taxes going up on that. I don't know what's really in Joe Manchin's heart. I can't say that because he's voted the right way on a number of pieces of legislation, and he's stuck with the Democrats. And it would be, I mean, his governor, Jim Justice, the West Virginia governor, got elected as a Democrat and flipped to being a Republican. It would not be difficult or painful for Joe Manchin to do that. So, you know, I think we need to. Well, I don't know. I'm trusting that Nancy Pelosi in particular. I'm losing confidence in Chuck Schumer, but I'm trusting that Nancy Pelosi has this in hand, and Joe Biden, President Biden. Richard, thanks a lot for the call. We'll be right back. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. You know, the media is pushing this crazy narrative that with regard to masks and vaccines and COVID and all this kind of stuff, that America is divided. Like, half of us want masks and half of us don't, or half of us want vaccines. It's just not true. 75% of Americans have received at least one dose of vaccine. 70% of Americans think that we should have mask mandates in all of our schools. Only 17%, this is from the latest Pew studies, polling, only 17% of Americans are opposed to mask mandates in schools. And what we have is this tiny fringe that is being cranked. Now we're learning from China as well as from Russia and perhaps other countries, plus the people in, a relatively small number of people, Trump followers, who think that tearing the country apart is a good thing and somehow it'll hurt Joe Biden and hurt the Democrats in the next election. It's crazy. I got a whole video rant about this over at thomhartmann.com that you can check out. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. I made a comment kind of on the way out of a break that I'm a vegan who eats fish a couple times a month, which, by the way, is something that Louise and I started doing. We had been vegetarians since we were 16, 17 years old. We started doing when we moved to Portland back, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And my what do you call him, natural health practitioner, there's a word for it here in Portland. Anyhow, he said, my naturopath, he said, you need to start doing this. I don't know if it's true or not. But anyhow, I said I'm a vegan who eats fish once or twice a month. And Matt Sowell tweets to me, he says, you're not a vegan or even a vegetarian if you eat fish twice a month. You are a vegan if you practice veganism 100% of the time. You could say I eat a vegan diet most of the time, but don't claim to be a vegan if you're not. It causes confusion. Matthew, you are absolutely right. So I guess I am a person who eats a vegan diet all the time, except for once or twice a month, I'll eat some salmon, and that's about it. So anyhow, back to your phone calls. Rachel in Bloomington, Minnesota. Hey, Rachel, what's on your mind?
Hey, I've called before. I told you I worked in forensics and criminology and social services and all that. In Minnesota, there's something that's not talked about, but it's a division of child protection where if a young woman wants to get an abortion and she's under 18, she has to go basically before a judge and have it okayed. Right. And she has to have or she can go to a clinic if both of her parents are there with her and say it's okay. But when I worked for this branch of child protection, we got many young women who were raped. Some sounded like incest. They didn't want to go into it very deeply, but we were talking like 14, 15, 16-year-old girls. And in Minnesota, we have the largest Somalian population outside of Somalia. We also have a really large Hmong population. And we heard the same story over and over again. These young women would say, well, this is a man who's, 50 years old. He's like my uncle or second cousin. He's been, it's been decided that he's going to be my husband, even though I don't want to marry him. He's raped me several times, and now I'm pregnant. And if it's found out that I'm pregnant, I will be forced to marry him. And if anyone found out that I got an abortion, I would be stoned in the center square.
Wow.
So
and this is from your personal experience, Rachel.
Yes. And so we would, send them before the judge, and the judge would okay this for, this is a minor who needs this, even though they're not able to get their parental signatures.
Right.
And it would go through most of the time. But what was crazy to me was that it was such a temperamental, fickle system that it relied upon what judge was working that day, because they rotated, and what social services agencies were working that day. Right. And like my job, I mean, one day my supervisor came in and said, stop everything you're doing. You need to gather all the statistics on all the abortions last year because Minnesota Council for the Right to Life has demanded them. And I was like, well, who cares? I mean, aren't they like a nonprofit? Like, why am I at their beck and call within workday's notice?
Right.
And it all seems so temperamental, and it's reminding me of this Texas thing because I thought, isn't it like cut and dry? Like we have Roe, this is a legal thing, and it's really not. It's like correct. Who you get on any given day.
Yeah. Rachel, thank you for sharing your story, your personal experience with us. I appreciate it.
Yep.
Charles in Miami, Florida. Hey, Charles, what's up?
Hey, how you doing, Tom? I love your show. Thank you for coming on every day around this time. This is perfect for me.
Thank you.
But I would like to say that it just seems more than interesting or just hypocritical that you get to nail Republicans down on the fact that they are so adamant and so fearful of government intruding on their lives, but yet they're intruding on women's lives by trying to influence them, with this abortion tactic, and then they're coming out with a heavy hand of the government, and we have to call that out. But there's also something that's bothering me, and I just got to ask you if we went through a whole term with Trump, and the Democrats and everyone was saying how corrupt he is. How come no one has said, well, if you want to run again, Donald Trump, this time you're going to give us at least 14 months of your taxes? And why don't we make that a law right now? Because we have all the means that we can say, if you ever want to run for president again in this country, you should at least give us your taxes within 18 months or even less a year.
There are a couple of states that have legislation pending that would, that would say that. California, I believe, is one of them. But it either is being challenged or will be challenged. I frankly don't recall if it passed or not on constitutional basis, because there's no such limit like that in the Constitution. And frankly, I think that's a little too gimmicky, Charles. I mean, Trump, by that time, Trump's tax returns will probably be public anyway. So he'll just say, here you go.
There's no guarantee about that. And the thing is, under Trump, there was so much precedent that was made,
Yeah, and so many precedents that were broken, or long-standing traditions. I think the better way to try to prevent him from running, if the Democrats decide that's their goal, is to invoke the 14th Amendment and to argue that he incited an insurrection, which is what they impeached him for the second time, successfully. To say that he incited an insurrection and therefore he is unqualified to run for public office. But I'm not quite as worried about Trump as some of the others.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Hidden History of American Healthcare: Why Sickness Bankrupts You and Makes Others Insanely Rich by by me. I wrote this book. This is from the introduction, the title, How a Single-Payer Healthcare Systems Helps Stop COVID-19. Healthcare systems can be national security systems. Just ask anyone from Taiwan. From January 20th, 2020, the United States, or on January 20, 2020, the United States recorded its first known case of COVID-19 infection. The following day, Taiwan got their first one, too. By the end of April, over 1 million Americans were infected with the virus. But Taiwan had recorded only 388 infections, and their last case of local transmission was on April 12th. A few had arrived on aircraft from other countries. All were contained by quarantine. As of this writing in September 2020, there hadn't been a single new case or a single death in Taiwan since April. The economy never shut down, and as of this writing, was projected to have grown nearly 2% in 2020. Business, restaurants, theaters, and sports events were all open. Life was back to normal, albeit a mask-wearing normal. And it was made possible by their national single-payer healthcare system and their citizens' willingness to do their bit for the collective good. Back in the 1980s, Taiwan was on the edge of moving toward a democracy after a military coup in the 1960s. And about 40% of Taiwanese families did not have health insurance. If somebody in a family got sick, the cost of care often wiped out that family, and demands for reform were loud across the nation. Yue Reinhardt was a German-born healthcare economist married to a Taiwanese woman, and he attended a conference on healthcare in Taipei in 1989. His presentation impressed representatives of the government in attendance, and while he was still in town for the conference, they asked him for his best suggestion for a national healthcare system. He and his wife went back to their hotel and discussed the issue in depth, finally deciding that a single-payer national system would be the most cost-effective, efficient, and comprehensive program possible. He shared his thoughts with the government representatives, and the next day he left Taiwan to go back to Princeton, where he was an economic professor. 6 months later, though, a representative of Taiwan's government called him to say that they were going to take up his suggestion and asked him to help craft their healthcare program. He enthusiastically agreed, and by 1995, Taiwan had instituted one of the world's best single-payer healthcare systems. Today, everybody in Taiwan is fully covered for doctor and hospital services. Everybody has a driver's license-like healthcare card, which accesses their entire medical history. They can book a doctor's appointment on any computer terminal in the country, and the entire cost of the system is a bit more than 6% of Taiwan's GDP. For comparison, in the United States, healthcare consumes 24% of our GDP. Because there is no insurance company intermediaries sucking profits off the system in Taiwan. When COVID-19 hit, Taiwan chose not to use the blunt force technique of shutting down their economy and locking people in. Instead, they took on the coronavirus with an aggressive nationwide test and contact trace program tied into the National Health Service database. Every infected person was identified and put into a comfortable quarantine, and every person he or she had come into contact with, even very marginal contacts, were also tested and their contacts traced. By April, just a bit more than 2 months after the first case surfaced, the country had the coronavirus isolated and completely under control. By quarantining inbound visitors to the nation island of 23 million, they were able, as of this writing, to keep it that way. Maintaining public health is one of the most important functions of any nation's healthcare system. Because America's is so fragmented, it's inconceivable that our nation could respond to an epidemic, a pandemic, or another public health disaster with the speed and elegance of Taiwan or any of the world's other nations with single-payer Medicare for all types of systems. It's like Stockholm Syndrome, a friend who's a psychotherapist said, describing the way that Americans have clung for more than 5 generations to a for-profit health insurance system, while the rest of the world figured out how to provide health care to all their citizens at a much lower price. People know it and have become familiar with it, she added. They just can't imagine anything else. It's probably the largest con job ever perpetrated on the American people, one that has cost trillions of dollars and millions of lives. It's been going on since the 1940s. If it were a scientific experiment, it would have been shut down by the ethics review panels generations ago. This experiment in providing health care via a for-profit insurance system has led to the deaths of more Americans than we lost in World War II. Every year, over 500,000 Americans go bankrupt, often losing everything they've worked their entire lives for because somebody in their family got sick. That's million families a year, every year, for the past few decades. And the coronavirus, of course, has only made things worse. Perhaps most galling, this massive ripoff is costing our entire nation and each of us individually a fortune. Insurance premiums right now make up 22% of all taxable payroll, well above what the cost of Medicare for all would be at around 14% when first put into place, dropping down to around 10% within a few years as previously uninsured people get their health needs up to date. As the health insurance, drug, and hospital parasites push their suckers deeper and deeper into our body politic, spending on health care by Americans went up 25% between 2000 and 2014. The book, The Hidden History of American Health Care, by Thom Hartmann.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Welcome to our third hour. As Americans realize that the Supreme Court, frankly, has always been partisan. I mean, you know, from arguably from the foundation of the Republic, the Supreme Court has been partisan. In fact, John Adams put his Thomas Jefferson's second cousin, John Marshall, a Federalist, a high Federalist, what today we would call maybe a Steve Bannon conservative, on as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, knowing, knowing that Jefferson was coming in. He did this after he lost the election to Jefferson, and then had Congress shrink the number of members of the court so Jefferson couldn't appoint people. So Jefferson came in and had Congress expand the number of members of the court. I mean, this is how political the court was in 1800, 221 years ago. So, we've always had this myth in America that the Supreme Court was somehow above it all, that the Supreme Court was, like the gods on Mount Olympus. They are neutral arbiters, as John Roberts said when he was at his confirmation hearings. We're just like umpires who call balls and strikes. We merely enforce the law. Well, we all know that's BS. It's not true. The Supreme Court makes law all the time. They made law in Plessy versus Ferguson. They created legal apartheid in the United States in 1896. They then, or 1898, whichever year it was. They then struck that law down in 1954 by reversing themselves. They reversed their own law in Brown versus Topeka Board of Education. The Supreme Court invented this whole legal fiction called corporate personhood in the 1880s, and then doubled down on it in 2010 with Citizens United, and then added to it the legal fiction that because corporations don't have mouths, but they are persons, and therefore they have rights to speak. How do they speak if they don't have a mouth? Well, you'd think maybe, their spokesman could walk up to a microphone, but no. They can use money. And if they want to buy politicians, that's just fine. So, we've been watching this for a lot of years. And the court goes back and forth. They supported, laws against abortion, then they were opposed to laws against abortion, and now it looks like they're going to support laws against abortion again. Among other things, that topic has come up a lot today because I invited people to call in about their experiences with the Women's March. And the Women's March had kind of morphed into an abortion rights march. And so people have been calling about that topic. But this idea that the court is not a partisan actor in American politics is a fantasy that is dying right in front of us, and for good reason. The last time the court went down in flames in terms of public opinion like this, by the way, was in 1936, 1937. Franklin Roosevelt, in the previous 4 years, from 33 until 36, He was elected in the election of 32. He took office in March of 33. And then, he was up for re-election in November of 36. So during that period of time, he got a hell of a lot of stuff done. He got Social Security passed. He got the right to unionize passed. He got unemployment insurance passed. He got the WPA and CCC and a whole bunch of other acronym agencies passed that literally put millions of Americans to work on the government payroll, planting trees, building roads, building highways, building dams. But the Supreme Court in the 1937 session, which, by the way, starts today, the first Monday of October, the Supreme Court in the fall 37 session was preparing to take up what was called there was a package of FDR's bills that included Social Security my apologies, there was a name for it that was sort of like the Resolution Trust or something like that, but the court was preparing to take it up, and there was a very good chance that the Supreme Court was going to declare that as they had done so, by the way, they had already knocked down a half a dozen different initiatives of his regarding the New Deal. They were preparing to knock this down too, and it might have included Social Security. And so FDR went to war with the Supreme Court after he won election in 36 throughout and was inaugurated in January, I believe. We amended the Constitution to change the date. The Constitution used to have the president sworn in March because, it took 3 months to get to D.C. back in the day. They moved that back to January because in 32, when Roosevelt won the election, the country was in such a crisis that Republican Herbert Hoover was incapable or incompetent to deal with or unwilling to because of his ideology, that we suffered for 3 months longer than we needed to before FDR came in. So anyhow, when FDR came into power in 36, he essentially declared war on the Supreme Court. There were 4 guys on the Supreme Court led by Justice Robert Owens, or Owen Roberts, I think is his name actually, same as the guy who's the Chief Justice now. He wasn't the Chief Justice, but he was the leader of the 4 horsemen, who were these justices who were, gung-ho to knock down everything, and they had a 5th who would constantly join them, and FDR was seeing, in October they're going to take apart the Social Security Act and other things. And he mobilized the American public. He proposed legislation. At that time, I believe 5 of the members of the court, I might be wrong, it might have been 4, but several of the members of the court were over 70 years old at that time, and maybe even 6. And FDR proposed legislation that would have allowed all the members of the court who were over 70 to remain on the court, but become, quote, members emeritus. And therefore, all of them collectively had 1 vote. Now, this would have gone along with the Supreme Court, or with the U.S. Constitution, which says that once you're appointed to the federal bench, you've got a seat for life. Today, what people are proposing is, just move them off the court and move them back to, the Fifth Circuit, where they, in the case of Alito, where he came from, as long as they're still in a federal court. But anyhow, this was FDR's plan back in 36. And he had huge support for this. Now, the Republicans were yelling and screaming about it. He's packing the court, and it's a scheme, and he's trying to destroy America. But, right-wing editing of Wikipedia and other websites notwithstanding, if you actually go back and read histories of that era that were written in the 40s and 50s, there was every chance FDR could have gotten this done. And Owen Roberts, under all this political pressure, when the court came into session in October and FDR hadn't gotten his law passed through Congress yet, it was still being debated, Owen Roberts changed his vote and said, the New Deal is constitutional, we're going to go along with it. And over the course of the next few years, all of those guys left the court, all of the conservatives, and FDR basically filled the entire court with his own people, which is why I would argue is why the court, overturned Brown v. Board in 1954, or in part of why. But now the Supreme Court is picking up, today's Supreme Court is picking up a whole new set of hand grenades, essentially, political hand grenades. They did this shadow docket decision, basically overturning Roe v. Wade. Now they've got this Mississippi case. They scheduled arguments for that on December 1st to hear arguments on whether to just end Roe v. Wade altogether. In Mississippi, they're saying that pregnancy will be allowed up to the 13th week, but with major restrictions. I believe it's the 13th week, maybe it's the 12th, but it's first couple of months, which is a whole lot more reasonable than Texas, but still, it's like with major restrictions. They're going to hear a major gun case, and in this case, this is a New York law that says that if you want to get a permit to carry a concealed weapon, you have to have a reason. Now, it can be a fairly broad reason. I live in a dangerous neighborhood, or I travel, I have to drive through a part of town where, New York is pretty lax about this, generally speaking, but still, they require you to give a reason. And that's been, by the way, approved by that. Heller did not knock that down. That's been approved by the court forever. So they're going after the gun laws. There's a Maine case that says that right now in Maine, religious schools cannot get Maine state tax dollars. Following the whole idea of a separation of church and state. And that the court has agreed to listen to. They're taking up another death penalty case, in this case, the Boston Marathon bomber, Dzhokhar Sharnev. It was thrown out by an appeals court. And so that's being heard, a death penalty. And then also there's a Texas death row inmate's request to have his pastor be allowed to touch him and pray out loud with him in the death chamber, which is kind of an interesting take. And also whether Abu Zubaydah, who was the first victim of the CIA's horrific tortures after 9/11, and is still in Guantanamo, because we don't know what to do with this guy. He's not been convicted of any crimes. He was apparently an innocent guy, but he's trying to sue two of the people from the CIA who tortured him. And the government is saying, no, you can't do that. They have sovereign immunity, or some variation on that. And so that case is going before the Supreme Court. And all of these cases are just politically charged. And it's going to be real interesting to see, how this stuff shakes out. And I think these are going to become major. I think the court itself could become a major issue in the 2022 and 2024 elections. But if the court starts getting real aggressive, like the court did in 1936 against FDR, Joe Biden has this commission that's looking into ways to fix the court. And of course, my opinion. We should add at least 4 new justices to the court, and we should term limit them, essentially. We'll see.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Is this going to catch traction? Are the American, the numbers, the opinion poll numbers are terrible, which is why Sam Alito's out there squealing like a stuck pig. And welcome back. And Steve in Bellingham, Washington. Hey, Steve, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Getting back to the abortion issue, I had a story. I'm 59 years old, and my mother was probably about 10 years old during World War II, just to give you, an idea of the time. And she was in a conservative small town in Arkansas, and over the years she got more and more liberal, but she was, a conservative family in a conservative town, but she was always very pro-choice. And the reason why, for her, she told me the story that when she was a little girl, she saw a neighbor, a woman, come running out into the street from her house, screaming and wailing and crying because her daughter, who had premarital sex and got pregnant, had killed herself. So, you know, it's tragic. But my point is, that's the world, you know, I think today we don't have that kind of shame associated with premarital sex and pregnancy, thank God. But that's the kind of world they want to bring us back to, you know. That's and it's just terrible. It's a big flaw in their supposedly pro-life agenda, you know.
Yep.
And I just wanted to tell you that story.
Yeah, well, it's a good one, Steve. Thank you for calling, and thank you for sharing that experience. I appreciate it. Thank you. Liz in Los Angeles. Hey, Liz, what's on your mind today?
Hi, I'm calling about the Texas change in the abortion law. I worked in the Superior Court here in Los Angeles and occasionally floated into the Child Support Division, which was appalling. I mean, they did a competent job in the court system, but what went on with the men is just appalling. Men would have children some of them, not all of them, but some of them would have children all over the place. There was one guy, one time I was in there, he had 3 different girlfriends. He had children by each of them. He brought one of them into court. She was sitting with him at the counsel table. And every time he went back to Mexico, where he had a wife, he got her pregnant, and he had 8 children down there.
Wow.
So, yeah. So
Candidate for a vasectomy, if nothing else.
Well, that's what I think that should be instituted. If you're not paying your child support, there should be an automatic vasectomy. You have a chance to pay up, take out a loan and pay up on it, or you get a vasectomy. The other thing, now I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. If they had to pay, if these men had to pay child support from the time the woman got pregnant, and they put it in a special account that was secured, and then she would get it on the birth of the child and then get continued child support. But if she had sex with 3 or 4 guys and they didn't know who it was, they'd each have to put money in an account. And
that's where DNA tests come in.
Yeah, that would be later on down the line. Yeah. But I think if they had to pay, I think that would change a lot of minds.
Oh, I think almost anything that we could do to add to the responsibility, quote, burden of men around pregnancy is going to work in a pro-choice way. I'm absolutely with you. Liz, thank you very much. We'll be right back. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. The Illinois Democrats have filed a bill. This is wonderful. This is just so cool. 2 Democratic Illinois lawmakers, members of the Illinois House of Representatives, have filed a law on September 14th. It's called the Expanding Abortion Services, or Texas Act. Now, this article actually has 2 different laws, and there's another one called the Protecting Heartbeats Act. And actually, I guess it's the Texas Heartbeats Act, or the Protecting Heartbeats Act, that is the one that is of consequence. This was filed on September 28th in the Illinois House of Representatives, and it would allow any member, any citizen of Illinois, to sue gun manufacturers, importers, and dealers over any death or injury caused by their firearms. Lawsuits to seek damages start at $10,000. So basically what they're doing, what these lawmakers in Illinois, this is Representative Kelly Cassidy and Representative Margaret Croak. Apparently that bill was brought into by Margaret Croak of Chicago, the Protecting Heartbeat Act. What her bill would do is basically allow vigilantes in Illinois to sue gun manufacturers for a minimum of $10,000 if anybody gets injured by one of their guns, presumably in a non-self-defense situation or a non-police situation. Interesting, right? Interesting. Do you think that this is going to grow? I frankly think it's all unconstitutional. I think the Texas law is going to get struck down. I think this Illinois bill is probably going to go nowhere. But I've suggested on this program several times that blue states should be doing something similar, and guns is a great place to start if you want to get touchstone. What would you call them? Social issues. Into the mix that are going to make this thing happen. So, a place to start. The last story I wanted to leave you with or share with you is this guy who's the CEO of the intelligence firm Bavarius, Christopher Goldsmith, who made the point that every failed coup is just practice. He says, I think that what's most disturbing to people is now that it's become out in the open in the public. And I mention that because the House and Senate throughout the Trump administration, or at least the last 2 years of the Trump administration when the House was controlled by Democrats, they would subpoena Republicans basically and members of the Trump administration and people associated with them, including Steve Bannon, and say, you must come and speak. And the Republicans would say, screw you guys, I'm not going to do it. And so the Democrats would then send a letter to the Justice Department saying, will you please prosecute them for criminal contempt of Congress? And by the way, there's huge penalties and you can go to jail. It's a law. But Bill Barr's Justice Department said, we're not going to prosecute these things. Well, now this committee that is looking into January 6th has put a deadline that is coming up fairly soon here on you must testify about what you knew from January 6th. And they're saying, if you don't go along with this, we are going to hold you responsible. We are going to file with the Justice Department criminal complaints. Now, whether Merrick Garland will follow through on those is still a matter of speculation. One can hope. But keep an eye on that. Stick around. We'll be back with your calls after the break.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
27 minutes past the hour. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, helping you win the water cooler wars. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Hidden History of American Healthcare: Why Sickness Bankrupts You and Makes Others Insanely Rich by me. I wrote this book. This is from the introduction, the title, How a Single-Payer Healthcare Systems Help Stop COVID-19. Healthcare systems can be national security systems. Just ask anyone from Taiwan. From January 20th, 2020, the United States, or on January 20, 2020, the United States recorded its first known case of COVID-19 infection. The following day, Taiwan got their first one, too. By the end of April, over 1 million Americans were infected with the virus. But Taiwan had recorded only 388 infections, and their last case of local transmission was on April 12th. A few had arrived on aircraft from other countries. All were contained by quarantine. As of this writing, in September 2020, there hadn't been a single new case or a single death in Taiwan since April. The economy never shut down, and as of this writing, was projected to have grown nearly 2% in 2020. Business, restaurants, theaters, and sports events were all open. Life was back to normal, albeit a mask-wearing normal. And it was made possible by their national single-payer healthcare system and their citizens' willingness to do their bit for the collective good. Back in the 1980s, Taiwan was on the edge of moving toward a democracy after a military coup in the 1960s. And about 40% of Taiwanese families did not have health insurance. If somebody in a family got sick, the cost of care often wiped out that family, and demands for reform were loud across the nation. Yue Reinhardt was a German-born healthcare economist married to a Taiwanese woman, and he attended a conference on healthcare in Taipei in 1989. His presentation impressed representatives of the government in attendance, And while he was still in town for the conference, they asked him for his best suggestion for a national health care system. He and his wife went back to their hotel and discussed the issue in depth, finally deciding that a single-payer national system would be the most cost-effective, efficient, and comprehensive program possible. He shared his thoughts with the government representatives, and the next day he left Taiwan to go back to Princeton, where he was an economic professor. 6 months later, though, a representative of Taiwan's government called him to say that they were going to take up his suggestion and asked him to help craft their health care program. He enthusiastically agreed, and by 1995, Taiwan had instituted one of the world's best single-payer health care systems. Today, everybody in Taiwan is fully covered for doctor and hospital services. Everybody has a driver's license-like health care card, which accesses their entire medical history. They can book a doctor's appointment on any computer terminal in the country, and the entire cost of the system is a bit more than 6% of Taiwan's GDP. For comparison, in the United States, healthcare consumes 24% of our GDP. Because there is no insurance company intermediaries sucking profits off the system in Taiwan. When COVID-19 hit, Taiwan chose not to use the blunt force technique of shutting down their economy and locking people in. Instead, they took on the coronavirus with an aggressive nationwide test and contact trace program tied into the National Health Service database. Every infected person was identified and put into a comfortable quarantine, and every person he or she had come into contact with, even very marginal contacts, were also tested and their contacts traced. By April, just a bit more than 2 months after the first case surfaced, the country had the coronavirus isolated and completely under control. By quarantining inbound visitors to the nation island of 23 million, they were able, as of this writing, to keep it that way. Maintaining public health is one of the most important functions of any nation's healthcare system. Because America's is so fragmented, it's inconceivable that our nation could respond to an epidemic, a pandemic, or another public health disaster with the speed and elegance of Taiwan or any of the world's other nations with single-payer Medicare for all types of systems. It's like Stockholm Syndrome, a friend who's a psychotherapist said, describing the way that Americans have clung for more than 5 generations to a for-profit health insurance system, while the rest of the world figured out how to provide health care to all their citizens at a much lower price. People know it and have become familiar with it, she added. They just can't imagine anything else. It's probably the largest con job ever perpetrated on the American people, one that has cost trillions of dollars and millions of lives. It's been going on since the 1940s. If it were a scientific experiment, it would have been shut down by the ethics review panels generations ago. This experiment in providing health care via a for-profit insurance system has led to the deaths of more Americans than we lost in World War II. Every year, over 500,000 Americans go bankrupt, often losing everything they've worked their entire lives for because somebody in their family got sick. That's 500,000 families a year, every year, for the past few decades. And the coronavirus, of course, has only made things worse. Perhaps most galling, this massive ripoff is costing our entire nation and each of us individually a fortune. Insurance premiums right now make up 22% of all taxable payroll, well above what the cost of Medicare for all would be at around 14% when first put into place, dropping down to around 10% within a few years as previously uninsured people get their health needs up to date. As the health insurance, drug, and hospital parasites push their suckers deeper and deeper into our body politic, spending on health care by Americans went up 25% between 2000 and 2014. The book, The Hidden History of American Health Care by Thom Hartmann. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. So there are actually some substantial differences between the Taliban, the Afghanistan Taliban, the group that has, that Donald Trump signed what his Secretary of State his Defense Secretary and his National Security Advisor referred to as surrender documents to back in early 2020. There's a difference between the Taliban and ISIS, or even K-ISIS, which is how they're identifying the ISIS group that has emerged in Afghanistan. The main difference is that the Taliban's ambitions are largely confined to Afghanistan. They want to be a regional force. They were the government of Afghanistan before. They want to be the government of Afghanistan again. ISIS, on the other hand, wants to reestablish the entire caliphate across the Middle East, across Northern Africa, across parts of Southern Europe. And this is going to bring these two into conflict. I've got a whole video about this over at ThomHartmann.com for folks who support the program. Check it out. "35 minutes past the hour." Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And, oh, by the way, I just got a note that Owen Roberts was not one of the four horsemen. Okay, if so, I stand corrected. But Owen Roberts was the guy who realigned his decisions. I remember writing about that in Hidden History of the Supreme Court. Anyhow, picking up your phone calls, Mike in Salem, Oregon. Hey, Mike, what's up?
Hi, how's it going, Tom? Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
I am so sick of Republicans talking about money. Didn't I hear Donald Rumsfeld say they lost $7 trillion?
I don't. You know, Donald Rumsfeld's been dead for a while. What do you mean?
I mean, back when he was secretary, he got up in the podium and announced they lost $7 trillion.
Oh, no, that was billion. They had lost $6 or $7 billion of cash money that had gone missing, but it wasn't trillions. It was billions.
Well, trillion, billion,
it was a pile of money
they
you could see from outer space, yeah. Pallets of money.
Yeah, pallets of money. They lost it.
Well, they didn't lose it. It got, some of it got smuggled back into the United States by GIs. Some of it paid off warlords. Some of it paid people not to shoot at us. I mean, we just used it. It was crazy. It was Donald Rumsfeld's privatized war. I'm working on this book on neoliberalism right now, and I just discovered that Donald Rumsfeld's mentor was Milton Friedman. They were best friends. Milton Friedman tried to convince, with a series of letters and a personal visit, tried to convince Ronald Reagan to pick Don Rumsfeld as his vice president instead of George H.W. Bush, and then complained about it for years. And Rumsfeld, was so into Friedman's, just government shouldn't do anything, the free market will solve all problems theory. That's why he and L. Paul Bremer, dissolved the Iraqi army, shut down all of most all of the Iraqi government-owned industries, including steel and concrete and everything, and then just said, and let them loot the museums and everything else, and said, oh yeah, democracy's messy, but don't worry, everything is going to, magically be taken care of by the magic of the marketplace. And it hasn't turned out in Iraq any more than it turned out in Chile, or any more than it turned out in Russia, or any more than, frankly, it's turning out here in the United States.
Yeah, I can't believe it. The dang Republicans just bark about money, and they lose. I don't know if it's trillion, billions. I don't care. They lost it. And we want money for the people in America. They hate America. They don't want money for the people in America.
Well, I don't think it's so much that they hate America. They hate the idea that they might have to pay taxes to support somebody that they consider lesser than them. I do think that we need some nuance there. But yeah, I get it, Mike. And the hate America thing is also it's kind of it's a cheap rhetoric that is commonly used on the right, and I'm reluctant to use it on the left. Eric in Erie, Pennsylvania. Hey, Eric, what's on your mind?
Hey. Afternoon, Tom. Listen, on your rant about court reform and the partisan leanings of courts, it's absolutely overdue. I experienced it directly when I was able to create new law in New York State back in 2013, and I got a 4-3 decision at the state's high court, and it came down strictly along partisan lines. The law was so that individual citizens could sue third-party corporate criminals. There'd always been a firewall between in the form of the second party. And that was the door I was able to shove open.
Right.
And the reasoning by the dissenting justices in New York just gave away their
politics
for the it's amazing. You should go read the opinion. It was issued in October of 13. The case is Landon v. Kroll, Kroll.
Yeah, you've called about it before, Eric.
Yeah.
And so
I don't know if you're,
I'm not, and I don't have time to educate myself right now. But yeah, here another testimony. Thank you.
Corporate criminals.
Yeah,
it was a corporate criminal case by a citizen, and but for those 4 Mario Cuomo appointees on the court, I would have never gotten there.
Yeah, no, I get it. Eric, thank you for the call. Michael in Imperial Beach, California. Hey, Michael, what's up?
Hey, Mr. Hartmann, long time no talk. 30 seconds. Tom, please remind our audience about the Iroquois Nation, who Americans slaughtered, handled the situation when they realized that men were in power, only chaos was created, and that only women could vote for the Sockhams.
In 5 out of the 6 Iroquois nations, yes.
I'll give you that, right. Because they understood that when men rule, it only brings problems. And if you could tie that into the Bible, the abortion situation, and our current gun situation. Thank you, Tom.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Well said. Cindy in Euclid, Ohio. Hey, Cindy, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. I think one of the things that really chafes me is that these religious people that have spearheaded their agenda against abortion is stomping all over my religion. I, myself, believe in reincarnation. I'm like half Christian, half Buddhist. And I think that when, I give it about a 3-month thing, probably like yourself, where I think a woman should make up her mind in the first 3 months, just to be on the safe side. But I don't believe that the spirit enters until the baby is pretty viable. And that's my earnestly held religious belief. These religious groups should certify themselves as PACs and lose all their tax-exempt status, keeping this up. They've done a lot of damage. Here in Ohio, we had a law against lying in political ads. And the Susan B. Lift group took it to task when some Democrats said that your ads are just basically lying about abortion.
Yeah.
And the court went with it.
Yeah. I think what we're discussing here, Cindy, and thank you for putting a fine point on it, are essentially religious debates. The Catholic position, Catholic position historically has been all over the map. There was a time when the child was a child on quickening, and abortion laws kind of essentially kicked in after that, when you could feel a baby move. Then there were, arguably before that, it was at birth, inspiration, first breath, which ties arguably a little more biblically. But now, they've decided that it is a child at the moment mom and dad decide, hey, let's hop into bed and have sex. And therefore, there should not be birth control. Or at the very least, the moment that egg gets fertilized up in the fallopian tube but has not yet implanted itself in the uterus, thus the Catholic Church's opposition to hormonal birth control. And I get that. The Catholics are perfectly willing and welcome to believe that at the moment of fertilization, that single cell or 2 cells, rapidly multiplying, but nonetheless, is a person. Let them believe that. Just don't make it my law. I can't, my personal religious belief on this, and again, I think this is all, at least until viability, this has got to be religion, because it's not science, right?
Right. And I should have free will, just like the men do, And if I'm going to face God, and God's going to say, "Oh, you had that abortion, remember? To hell you go." That's on me, not on anybody else.
Yeah, and not on the state.
I mean, my great grandmother was aborted, Tom. The Catholic doctor decided that the baby was without as much sin or whatever, and tore that baby from my 30-year-old great-grandmother's body. And now my whole family has fallen away from the Catholic Church for that very reason.
I'm confused, but okay. Cindy.
Yeah, well, basically, they killed my grandmother to save the baby. Now she
I see what you're saying. No, so
3 orphans.
Yeah.
One heavily
Well,
epileptic.
and sometimes that choice has to be made, and that's a very, very terrible one. But again, I think that emphasizes the importance of defining this responsibility as at least pre-viability, and arguably pre-first trimester as being entirely the woman's choice. Cindy, thank you for the call. Margie in Wisconsin Rapids, Wisconsin. Hey, Margie, what's up?
Hey, Tom, back to the discussion about rapists suing for custody of their children. I personally know somebody who was impregnated by rape and had the child. The rapist was convicted and sentenced to many years in prison for raping her. She was court-ordered to provide visitation twice a month at the prison for the rapist to have visitation with the child.
Was the rapist her husband?
No.
Then how did what kind of legal pretzel did they have to twist themselves into to come up with that one?
Parental rights. He's a parent.
Oh, my God. That's amazing.
And let me tell you how devastating this was. She couldn't leave the state because she had to go see him in prison twice a month. If the prison transferred him from the northern part of the state to the southern part of the state, she had to move so she could provide this visitation. Mind you, it takes 6 hours to go from north to the south of Wisconsin. It's a long state.
Right.
It completely devastated her entire life.
That's incredible. That's just incredible. Margie, thank you. I really think that it's important that we start believing that women can make rational choices for themselves. I really do. Speaking as a man, I realize, I probably shouldn't have an argument.
Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
47 minutes past the hour. We'll be back. And welcome back. Holly in Marshall, Missouri. Hey, Holly, what's on your mind today?
Oh, I just wanted to tell you, I'm 79, so I lived through both times when it was illegal and times when it wasn't. And in the mid-'60s, I got pregnant, and I was very young. I'm 79 now. And I was just getting financially independent, and I had not much of a family, and I got pregnant. My boyfriend networked with other young men, and they set me up to get an abortion in New Jersey. And what he had to do was drive me at 8 o'clock at night, leave me at a dark, abandoned garage with fuel pumps and stuff. 15 minutes later, a man picked me up in a car, and like a Tony Soprano kind of man, and drove me around and around and around, and then took me to this suburban house. And inside was a full medical setup with doctors, nurses, everybody in. It was a real surgical room, and he said they were all moonlighting professionals.
Wow.
And there were about 10 women in there. And I started this conversation with the Tony Soprano guy, and he said that a lot of them were airline stewardesses. They were younger, not a little older than I was. Mm-hmm. And so they they knocked me out, gave me a D&C, and drove me back after I woke up around and around and around in the dark, and left me at that gas station again when my boyfriend was timed to pick me up. So that was the illegal one, and that cost $600 cash. Then, in the late 70s, and I was at the march in 1970 when we marched, after Roe in, let's see, it was 78, I think, I got pregnant again. The birth control was not very good. I went to a Planned Parenthood place. It was all run by women and nurses, and they used an aspiration technique, which was over in about 10 minutes, and I went back to work, and it was pay what you wish, what you can afford. Wow. So I gave them $150 or something like that. And so, of course, this is before Reagan, how things were. And I thought it was important to let people know that the mafia can go back and do that again, and they might.
Oh, they will.
Yeah. And the last thing is that there was no state with legal abortion before Roe.
Oh, really?
My girlfriends would go to Cuba, or they would go to Park Avenue.
So when I heard stories of people going to other states to get an abortion, they were just going to an illegal abortion clinic in another state, like you had to go to New Jersey.
Right, probably that, or right there on Park Avenue in New York City, for $1,000, you could go to a real doctor, and after hours, and get an abortion.
Holly, thank you. Thank you for educating me. Thank you for sharing a remarkable story. Thank you. We'll be right back. It's 51 minutes past the hour. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. Welcome back. Wisconsin. Hey, Linda, what's on your mind today?
Yes, I'd like to pose the question to you and your other listeners. Why do any of us think that a woman should be or a woman or a girl should be financially responsible for anything above and beyond the average cost of an abortion, for any costs incurred from the time of conception through the birth itself? So, in other words, my company, for example, the top Platinum Care or whatever, it's $3,000 for regular birth. There are all the doctor's visits, etc.
I mean, that's all your copays and things?
Yeah. So the average cost of a cesarean delivery in Wisconsin, if you don't have insurance, is over $20,000. Why should that not be the state's responsibility or the father's once the father's been proven to be the father? Why should a woman being forced to carry a pregnancy to term be responsible, again, for anything above and beyond half the cost of an average abortion? I'm totally against this. Insane.
I think, Linda,
She has to bear 100% of the physical part. We can't share that with the father. So why should she have to incur the financial part?
I think that if the Supreme Court succeeds in overthrowing Roe, and I'm guessing they will before the end of this year, actually we will find out about it next spring, so they probably will by March, April of next year. Then what's going to happen is that you're going to start seeing some states pass laws that are doing something like that are holding men responsible.
It's absolutely necessary. I mean, men need to have skin in the game. This is so unfair. It just makes me furious. I'm a person that had an abortion. Luckily, it was a legal one. But if I hadn't been able to get a legal abortion, I would have done anything and everything other than a coat hanger to get rid of that. I never wanted a child. I certainly didn't want to go through a pregnancy for an unwanted child, and it makes me furious when I hear some, an entity such as the Catholic Church, mandating that you can't even use birth control, that you're supposed to welcome an unwanted child into your life. There's so many people in this world that are having children that should not, for financial, emotional, whatever reasons. I mean, look at the woman that was just put to death under Trump's pregnancy, the abuse that she went through. She never should have had any children. Her parents shouldn't have had her. I mean, this is insane.
Yeah, I don't know what woman you're talking about, Linda.
She was put to death because she attacked another woman who was pregnant and cut out the baby and stole the baby to raise it on her own. But she had been raped repeatedly from a very young age by her father and his friends. Her mother was selling her services off to...
Oh, you're talking about the one woman that he
money.
Executed in the last weeks after he lost the election, the federal death penalty.
This was a child that never should have been born to the parents that she was born to, and we're going to have more of that. We have abortion outlawed, basically. You're going to have all kinds of people having babies that shouldn't. This is just insane. I'm sorry, but thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Linda. Jill in Camden, New Jersey. Hey, Jill, what's up?
Hello. I just want to throw something out there quickly to you. My sign, basically, for the march on Saturday said forced pregnancy